Elden Ring is a game so densely packed with hidden details, obscure references, and buried secrets that players have spent thousands of hours since its release, still finding things that were always there, sitting quietly in the dark, waiting to be noticed. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. I put this video together because I've always been fascinated by the parts of Elden Ring that most people walk right past. I spent about 8 months compiling, cross-referencing, and filtering through hundreds of entries to get this list down to 420. Some things got cut. A lot of cut content and data-mined material was intentionally left out, unless it had some visible trace in the final game, because I wanted everything here to be something you could actually go find yourself. I also made a deliberate choice to organize these, not by zone or by difficulty of discovery, but loosely by theme, because I think the connections between entries are sometimes just as interesting as the entries themselves. What you're going to hear is my interpretation of these details. None of this is confirmed canon unless I say so directly. Most of it suggests something, points towards something, or opens a door that the game never fully closes. That's kind of the point. So settle in. This one is long. Easter egg 1, the Erd Tree and the concept of Yggdrasil. The Erd Tree, the massive golden structure that dominates the sky of the lands between, draws an unmistakable visual and symbolic parallel to Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythology. In Norse cosmology, Yggdrasil was an immense sacred tree that connected 9 different worlds, serving as the axis of reality itself. The Erd Tree functions in a nearly identical way within Elden Ring's cosmology. It is the source of grace, the golden light that guides Tarnished across the land, and its roots run so deep that they reach beneath every corner of the map. Item descriptions throughout the game refer to the Erd Tree's roots, extending into the underground, and when you explore the deep root depths, you can see just how vast that root system truly is. The parallel between Yggdrasil and the Erd Tree is likely not a coincidence, and given from software's history of layering mythological frameworks into their world building, this one feels very deliberate. Easter egg 2. Margit the Fell Omen's true identity. Most players who fought Margit early in the game, and then met Morgott much later, had a moment of recognition when they realized the voice, the posture, and the general energy of both characters are essentially identical. That's because they are the same being. Morgott, the Omen King, disguises himself as Margit to test the Tarnished before they ever reach Stormvale Castle. The detail that makes this particularly interesting is that Margit warns you, in no uncertain terms, to turn back. He is not trying to kill you for the sake of killing you. He is trying to stop you from reaching his castle, and by extension, his father. The item you receive, upon defeating him, Margit's Shackle, can be used to briefly stun Morgott during his boss fight. The game is quietly telling you that these two encounters are the same story, just seen from different sides of a very long journey. Easter egg 3. The Crucible Knights and the Age of the Crucible. Crucible Knights are some of the most lore-dense enemies in the game, and most players simply fight them without reading a single description attached to them. Their armor set describes them as knights who served the Erd Tree before it was fully formed, back when life was more primal and the crucible of existence had not yet been refined into the clean golden order the game's present is built on. The Crucible Knight armor even grows a tail if you look at it closely enough, suggesting these knights once bore traits of the Crucible themselves. The aspects of the Crucible incantations, which allow the player to sprout a tail, a brachial appendage, or horns, are described as ancient techniques, drawing on that same primordial state. The implication is that the Elden Ring's current religious order spent generations suppressing and erasing something older and stranger that once defined life in the lands between. Easter egg 4. The painter hidden in the volcano manor. Inside Volcano Manor, there is a room that contains a painting and a small detail that most players miss entirely. If you look at the signature on the painting, or examine the lore of the prattling putty items found nearby, there are references to the idea of someone wanting to be remembered. The prattling pates themselves are little carved heads that speak phrases, and the phrase, "You're beautiful," has become a meme, but the item description for it says, it was carved by a prisoner who spent so long confined that they began carving companions for themselves. The painting in that room suggests the prisoner was also an artist, and the act of creation in captivity is a quiet form of defiance that the game doesn't announce loudly, but tucks into a corner for anyone paying attention. Easter egg 5. Rani's connection to the concept of the moon and lunar magic. Rani the Witch is one of the most beloved characters in the game, and her entire questline is soaked in references to lunar mythology and the concept of cycles. Her name itself connects to old Gaelic and Norse words associated with secrecy and the night. The Dark Moon Greatsword, which is the reward for completing her questline, carries descriptions that reference a blade of moonlight that predates the Erdtree's Golden Order. In multiple mythological traditions, the moon is associated with hidden knowledge, with the feminine divine, and with the cycle of death and renewal. Rani's entire arc is about rejecting the destined cycle of the Elden Ring and replacing it with something new. She doesn't destroy the old order, she escapes it, which points toward the idea that the moon in her mythology isn't a destroyer, it's a way out. Easter egg 6. The Tibia Mariner and the River of the Dead. The Tibia Mariner is one of the more visually unusual enemies in the game, a skeletal figure rowing a boat that floats on air, summoning undead as it goes. The obvious reference here is Charon, the ferryman of the dead in Greek mythology, who rowed souls across the river Styx to the underworld. But the detail that makes this reference more specific is the Tibia Mariner's item drop, the Death Root. Death Root is the substance that feeds Gurranq, the beast clergyman, and which is connected to destined death, the aspect of death that was stolen from the Elden Ring. The Tibia Mariner isn't just a visual reference to a mythological ferryman, it's a creature that carries the literal substance of true death in a world where true death has been locked away, which suggests that these mariners are remnants of an older order, still doing a job that the world was redesigned to make irrelevant. Easter egg 7. The Finger Maidens and the concept of oracles. Finger Maidens are the female attendants assigned to Tarnished, and they serve as intermediaries between the Tarnished and the Two Fingers, the messengers of the greater will. The Two Fingers are themselves references to a much older concept in From Software lore, involving messengers and divine intermediaries. But what's interesting about the Finger Maidens specifically is the way their role mirrors that of the Pythia, the Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greek religion. The Pythia served as a mouthpiece for the god Apollo, transmitting divine will to mortals who came seeking guidance. The Finger Maidens transmit the will of something vast and inhuman to people who can't directly perceive it. Your own Finger Maiden, Melina, is a special case because she has no fingers, which the game points toward as a sign that she may not be what she first appears to be. Easter egg 8. The Scarlet Rot in ancient Mesopotamian mythology. Melinia's Scarlet Rot is one of the most visually striking elements in the game, and players have pointed out that the way it spreads, blooms, and transforms the landscape around it bears a resemblance to descriptions of divine pestilence in ancient Mesopotamian religious texts. Specifically, the Sumerian concept of a god's curse manifesting as a spreading, unstoppable transformation of the natural world. The Halig tree, Malenia's home, is described as a tree grown from her own flesh, nourished by rot, and yet still somehow producing life, specifically the scarlet Ionia flower. This mirrors the Mesopotamian concept of life and death being inseparable aspects of divine power, where a goddess of death was also, necessarily, a goddess of life. Malenia's final form, the goddess of rot, takes this full circle. She is not simply diseased. She is, by the game's own logic, divine in her suffering. Easter egg 9. Alexander the Iron Fist and his connection to Siegmeyer. Alexander is one of the most endearing characters in Elden Ring. A large jar that has become a warrior and is determined to fill himself with the essence of powerful fighters. He is, in terms of personality, nearly identical to Siegmeyer of Katarina from Dark Souls, a cheerful, good-natured, somewhat bumbling warrior who nonetheless has a deep and touching arc. Both characters require player assistance multiple times, both have a habit of getting stuck, and both meet an ending that is bittersweet at best. The detail that makes this connection especially pointed is Alexander's final request, which echoes Siegmeyer's arc in asking the player to be the instrument of a warrior's end. From Software has never confirmed this is intentional, but given how precisely the beats line up, it points strongly toward Alexander being a deliberate spiritual successor to one of the most beloved side characters in the Souls series. Easter egg 10. The Lands Between, as a reference to the liminal space concept. The name itself is the Easter egg. The Lands Between is a translation of the Japanese title's concept of an in-between place, a liminal threshold. In folklore and mythology across multiple cultures, the space between worlds is a dangerous and unpredictable place where normal rules don't apply. It's the place you pass through, not the place you stay. The fact that the player character is a tarnished, someone who has died and not been allowed to truly pass on, who has been called back to a place they once left, reinforces this. The entire game is set in a place that is, by definition, a waiting room. The various endings can be read as different ways of resolving that liminal state, of finally deciding what this in-between place becomes once someone has the power to define it. Easter egg 11. The grafted scion's design and the concept of sin made flesh. The grafted scion is the first enemy most players encounter in Elden Ring, appearing in the tutorial area and almost certainly killing them. It's a grotesque creature made entirely of grafted limbs, a tangle of arms, legs and weapons. What many players don't notice on that first encounter, because they're immediately overwhelmed, is that the creature's design mirrors almost exactly the descriptions of the omens in this world, beings marked at birth by extra limbs as a sign of divine stigma. Godric the Grafted, who is one of the main bosses, has taken this concept and applied it to himself voluntarily, grafting the arms of defeated warriors onto his own body. The scion you fight at the start of the game suggests that Godric's personal aesthetic didn't come from nowhere. It was, in some form, already present in the world's mythology before he adopted it. Easter egg 12. The wandering nobles and their connection to Godric's court. The wandering nobles who patrol Stormvale Castle and its surroundings are a fascinating example of environmental storytelling. Their item descriptions and the way they're dressed suggest they were once members of Godric's court, people who served him and absorbed enough of his particular madness that they themselves began grafting. When you look closely at some of the wandering nobles in the later parts of Stormvale, you can see evidence of rudimentary grafting on their bodies. They haven't gone as far as Godric, but the trajectory is clear. The implication is that Godric's obsession with grafting wasn't just personal, it was ideological. He created a court culture around it, and the people who served him long enough began to reflect that culture in their own flesh. Easter egg 13. Patches and his infinite reincarnation across From Software games. Patches is, at this point, a From Software institution. He appears in Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring, always as a scheming, treasure-hungry merchant who has a habit of trapping or backstabbing the player character and then offering to do business afterward. In Elden Ring, his full name is Patches the Untethered, which is a detail that fans have pointed toward as a sly acknowledgement of his cross-game existence. He is untethered from any single world. His lore in each game is slightly different, but his personality, his voice, and his fundamental nature are identical. Some players have developed the theory that Patches is not a reincarnating character, but literally the same man, cursed or blessed to wander between worlds, running his little schemes forever. The game never confirms this, but his name in Elden Ring seems to be winking at exactly that reading. Easter egg 14. The Elden Beast and the concept of a divine parasite. The Elden Beast, the final boss of the main game, is described in its item lore as a creature from the outer reaches of the universe that arrived in the lands between carrying the Elden Ring. It is not the god, it is the vessel. Queen Marika was the god in the sense of being the Elden Ring's earthly host, but the Elden Beast was always the true anchor of the ring's power. The detail that makes this unsettling on reflection is that the relationship between Marika and the Elden Beast could be read less like a god and her sacred companion, and more like a host and the entity living inside her. The Elden Beast shaped the Elden Ring to its own ends. Marika's rebellion against the greater will, which she expressed by shattering the ring, can be read as the desperate act of someone who finally realized they were never truly in control of their own divinity. Easter egg 15. The ghostly figures at sites of grace. When you rest at a site of grace, if you look carefully at the golden light and the way it moves, you can sometimes see suggestions of shapes within it. More specifically, some fans have noted that the animations around certain sites of grace include what appear to be translucent figures, echoes of previous visitors to that sacred spot. This is never confirmed as a feature in any official material, but it aligns with the lore concept of grace as a trail left by the Erd Tree, a path walked by many before you. The sites of grace aren't just fast travel points. They are, in the game's mythology, sacred spots where the connection between the tarnished and the divine is strongest, which means every person who has ever rested there left some trace of themselves behind. Easter egg 16. Rykard's philosophy and the Volcano Manor questline's true purpose. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, is a character whose stated goal sounds like simple nihilism, consuming everything until nothing is left, until he has devoured even the gods. But the questline built around him, the Volcano Manor and its assassination contracts, tells a more nuanced story. The targets you're sent to kill are all people who are, in some sense, working against the established order, which means Volcano Manor is recruiting people who already hate the system. Rykard's philosophy, when you look at it through the lens of who he recruits, is less about destruction and more about building an alternative. He wants to fill himself with the power of everything the old order took for itself. The snake that consumed him is described as the great serpent of ancient legend, which in multiple mythological traditions is associated with knowledge, with cycles, and with the consuming transformation of the old world into something new. Easter egg 17. The connection between the Liurnian Academy and real-world Renaissance alchemists. The Academy of Raya Lucaria is modelled visually and conceptually on the great intellectual institutions of late medieval and early Renaissance Europe, with particular echoes of the alchemical academies of Germany and Italy during the 14th and 15th centuries. Real-world alchemists of that period combined genuine scientific inquiry with deeply spiritual beliefs about the transformation of base material into something divine. The sorcerers of Raya Lucaria are doing something structurally identical, attempting to use the material of the world, the glintstone embedded in stars, to unlock something beyond human limitation. The key detail here is that both the historical alchemists and the game's sorcerers believed they were close to something transcendent, and both, according to the lore, may have been right in a way that destroyed them. Easter egg 17b Glintstone and the cosmic horror beneath wonder. The glintstone used by sorcerers in Elden Ring is described in her item lore as a crystallization of the stars themselves, fragments of cosmic matter that fell to the lands between from the outer reaches of the universe. The primeval current, which the heretical sorcerers of the Academy pursued, is described as the original flow of magic that predated the Erdtree's order. The detail that makes this feel like a cosmic horror reference is subtler. The farther down the rabbit hole you follow the Academy's sorcery traditions, the more you encounter references to a wisdom that fundamentally unmakes the people who pursue it. Azur and Lusat, the two master sorcerers of the primeval current, are found as broken figures, still alive, but hollowed in a way that suggests they reached the truth they were looking for, and survived it only technically. Easter egg 18. The demigods and the myth of divine siblings who destroy each other. The central conflict of Elden Ring's backstory is built around the children of Queen Marika and their War of the Shattering. 2 demigod children went to war. The rest followed, and the result was a catastrophe that left the lands between broken. This structure maps almost exactly onto multiple mythological cycles involving divine siblings. Norse mythology has the Aesir-Vanir War. Greek mythology has the Titanomachy. Hindu mythology has the wars of the Devas and Asuras. In every case, the story is structurally identical. Divine beings who are supposed to be unified destroy each other in a conflict over power, and the world below them pays the price. Elden Ring is very deliberately playing in this tradition. The shattering isn't unique in the game's world. It is, the lore suggests, what happens when gods have children. Easter egg 19. Mohg's hidden lake of blood and its visual echo of real cult practices. Mogwyn Palace, the hidden late-game area associated with Mohg, Lord of Blood, is built around a lake of crimson blood that serves as a kind of sacred pool. Albinaurics, humanoid creatures associated with blood, are brought there as offerings. The visual and structural language of this place echoes real-world mystery cults from ancient history, particularly those associated with chthonic deities who demanded blood offerings and promised hidden divine favour in return. Mohg himself is described as having received a blessing from the Formless Mother, a being from outside the lands between, who offered him power in exchange for devotion. The detail that connects this to real history is that mystery cult memberships in the ancient world were often described exactly this way: a hidden patron, a secret pool, a transformation available only to the initiated. Easter egg 20. The Tarnished's appearance options and the concept of the returning dead. The character creation screen in Elden Ring allows you to make a Tarnished who looks, essentially, like any kind of person. But the lore behind the Tarnished is that these are people who died, had their grace stripped from them, were exiled from the lands between, and have now been called back by a new grace to try again. The fact that you can make your character look ancient and decayed or young and healthy is a quiet nod to the reality that the Tarnished exist in an ambiguous state between life and death. They can be killed repeatedly and come back. Their bodies are subject to them in a way that living bodies are not. The character creator is, in a lore sense, you choosing what shape your death has left you in, which makes even the cosmetic choices feel like they carry weight. Easter egg 21. The connection between Melina and the Gloam-eyed Queen. Melina's true identity is one of the most debated mysteries in the Elden Ring community. The Gloam-eyed Queen is a figure mentioned in item lore as a former champion of Destined Death, who was defeated by Malekith, the Black Blade. After her defeat, Destined Death was sealed away, and the Age of Undeath, where people could no longer truly die, effectively began. Melina has no fingers, which in the game's logic marks her as separate from the Finger Maiden tradition. She has one eye closed at all times, and the visible eye has an unusual appearance. When she burns herself to unlock the Erdtree, the visual echoes of Destined Death are present. The theory That Melina is the reborn or fragmented soul of the gloam-eyed queen isn't confirmed by the game, but every available detail points toward it rather than away. Easter egg 22. The Carian royal family's connection to the moon and their distant origins. The Carian royal family, associated with lunar sorcery and represented by Renala, Rani, Ricard, and Radan, is described in item lore as having origins that predate the Erd Tree's dominance. The Carian Manor, their ancestral home, contains stars embedded in the floors and ceilings, and their most powerful magic calls on the moon rather than the golden grace of the Erd Tree. Some item descriptions suggest that the Carian bloodline came from outside the lands between, which would make them structurally a people whose divine allegiance was to a different cosmic power than the one that currently rules. Their eventual marriage alliance with the golden lineage of the Erd Tree, Renala marrying Radagon, is framed not as a romantic story, but as a political and theological merger, one that didn't end well for anyone involved. Easter egg 23. Radagon's true identity and the body horror of divine duality. Radagon of the Golden Order is introduced as Marika's second husband. As you progress through the game, item descriptions and environmental clues suggest that Radagon is not a separate person from Marika, but rather a second self, an aspect of the same being. Some descriptions go further and suggest that Marika split herself into Radagon, or that Radagon emerged from Marika as a kind of divine masculine counterpart. The body horror element here is that Radagon spent his life trying to repair the Elden Ring that Marika shattered, essentially working against himself. If they are one being with two minds, then the whole history of the shattering could be read as a god at war with their own nature, literally embodied in two separate people who married each other, which is as strange and as dark as From Software gets. Easter egg 24. The giants' mountaintops and their echo of Norse frost giant mythology. The mountaintops of the giants area is, visually and thematically, a deliberate reference to the domain of frost giants in Norse mythology. The giants of Elden Ring were the keepers of the Flame of Ruin, a sacred destructive fire that the Erd Tree's forces waged war against them to extinguish. The design of the giants, massive, ancient, melancholic, with great chain-wrapped eyes, echoes the Norse tradition of giants not as simply evil, but as primordial beings who represent forces older than the current divine order. In Norse myth, the frost giants are the enemies of the Aesir, but they are also, in a sense, what the world was made from. The giants in Elden Ring were here before the Erd Tree. Their fire was here before Golden Grace. The war against them reads less like a conflict between good and evil, and more like the replacement of one cosmological order by another. Easter egg 25. The Flask of Wondrous Physic and its connection to real-world potion traditions. The Flask of Wondrous Physic is a unique item that players can customize by adding 2 cracked tiers, each of which modifies the flask's effect. The word physic is an archaic English term for medicine or healing, derived from the Latin physica and used extensively in early modern England to refer to the practice of healing through natural and alchemical means. The design of the flask, a teardrop-shaped vessel associated with sacred tears, mirrors the tradition in medieval Europe of collecting sacred relics in tear-shaped containers called ampullae, which were believed to hold miraculous healing powers. The game is drawing on centuries of religious and medical tradition with this item, embedding the concept of folk medicine, faith, and alchemy into a single customizable container. Easter egg 26. The fingerprint stone shield and its implication about the 2 fingers. The fingerprint stone shield is one of the largest shields in the game, and its description refers to the carvings on its surface as resembling the fingerprints of a giant. In the context of Elden Ring's lore, the two fingers are the divine messengers of the greater will, intermediaries who transmit the will of an outer god to the people of the lands between. The implication carried by a massive fingerprint on a stone shield is that the beings who left such prints are of a scale so vast that their touch alone leaves permanent marks on the physical world. The three fingers, the chaotic counterpart to the two fingers, are associated with the flame of frenzy, which is described as older and more primal than the Erdtree's order. The fingerprint on this shield could point toward an encounter with something much larger than the fingers the player interacts with directly. Easter egg 27. Blade the Half-Wolf and his role as a bound guardian. Blade is one of the most beloved characters in Elden Ring, a half-wolf warrior sworn to protect Ranni. The detail that deepens his character beyond surface level is found in the lore associated with the two fingers, which reveals that Blade was created by them as a watchdog for Ranni, not just a companion. He is bound to her by something deeper than loyalty. His devotion to her is, in a literal sense, hard-coded into his existence. What makes his arc so affecting is that when Ranni's quest pushes against the will of the greater will, Blad's instincts push against his devotion to her, and you can see that conflict in his behaviour across the questline. His ending suggests that a being made to serve one master cannot survive being loyal to another, which is a tragedy with no villain, just an impossible situation. Easter egg 28. The crucible aspect of the breath incantation, an ancient dragon memory. Aspect of the crucible breath is an incantation that allows the player to breathe fire in a manner associated with the primordial crucible, the ancient state of life in the lands between. The interesting detail here is that the fire breathed by this incantation is explicitly not dragon fire. It is an older form of fire that predates the dragons, a distinction that the item description makes carefully. In the game's mythology, dragons were the dominant creatures of an earlier age, and they were associated with a primordial flame called the ancient dragon smithing stone tradition. But the crucible predates even that. The breath incantation suggests that there was a time before dragons when fire was a trait of all life equally, a shared biological inheritance that the specialization of species eventually concentrated into a few creatures. Easter egg 29. Morgoth's crown and the symbolism of hidden royalty. Morgoth, the Omen King, wears a crown that is broken and bent, wrapped partially in cloth as if to hide it. He is the last legitimate ruler of Leyndell, the capital city, and he has spent most of his life hiding what he is because omens are considered cursed by the Erdtree's order. The visual of a broken, wrapped crown is a direct expression of his character. He is royalty that has had to apologize for existing. He is a king who guards a city that considers his kind abominations. When you fight him in the arena of the capital, and he calls out to Marika, his mother, in the moment before his defeat, it reframes his entire role in the game. He wasn't defending the Erdtree because he believed in it. He was defending it because it was the last thing his mother built, and he loved her even after everything. Easter egg 30. The sealed tunnel and its connection to the buried city of subterranean shunning grounds. The subterranean shunning grounds beneath Leyndell is one of the more disturbing areas in the game. A buried city beneath the capital that is never officially acknowledged. The name tells you what it was: a shunning ground. A place where the unwanted were put. Omens were thrown down there. People born with the wrong kind of grace were sent below. The presence of a living ecosystem, with its own underground architecture and population, beneath the golden city above, is a direct and pointed comment on what the Erdtree's golden order actually built its prosperity on. Every great civilization in the game's lore is built over something buried. Leyndell's underside is the most literal version of that, a forgotten community of people the city above literally sealed away in the earth and chose not to think about. Easter egg 31. The twin maiden husks and what they tell you about your finger maiden. The twin maiden husks are the shopkeepers at the round table hold, and they are, as their name suggests, the shed shells of former finger maidens. They can absorb and transmit the bell bearings of deceased merchants, allowing you to purchase their wares. The lore implication is quietly devastating. These husks are the remnants of women who gave everything to their role as finger maidens and were left as hollow shells when that role ended. The fact that they still serve a commercial function, organising the belongings of the dead for the benefit of the living, is either an act of mercy or a horror, depending on how you read it. It also casts a shadow on Melina, your own companion, because it raises the question of what happens to a finger maiden at the end of a tarnished's journey. Easter egg 32. Hugh the blacksmith and his imprisonment. Hugh the blacksmith is found at the round table hold, working at his forge, and he mentions in passing that he is unable to leave. He is imprisoned there, compelled to serve tarnished whether he wishes to or not. The detail that makes this more than just background texture is the reason implied by his dialogue. He is described as a heathen, someone outside the grace of the Erd tree, who was given a purpose that functions as both a gift and a cage. The round table hold itself is an in-between space, not fully part of the physical world. Being trapped in an in-between space, forced to serve people who come and go freely while you remain, is a kind of hell that the game describes with unusual precision for a side character. Easter egg 33. The Knights Cavalry and their role as divine hunters. The Knights Cavalry are a group of spectral horsemen who appear only at night, patrolling roads across the lands between. Their item lore describes them as the hunting party of a long-dead sovereign, riding eternal in service of a master who is gone. They carry weapons associated with death and spectral force, and their patrol routes suggest a systematic, almost methodical approach to their endless task. The reference here points toward the wild hunt of European folklore, a supernatural procession of spectral riders associated in various traditions with the god Odin, with the dead, and with the turning of the seasons. The Knights Cavalry are the game's version of this tradition, riders who cannot stop because the order that set them on their path was never formally rescinded. Easter egg 34. The Erd Tree Burial Watchdog and its ancient guardianship. The Erd Tree Burial Watchdog is a large stone cat-like creature found guarding catacombs throughout the game. Its item descriptions note that it was carved and animated to watch over the honoured dead in an age when the Erd Tree's faithful buried their greatest warriors in these underground tombs. The interesting detail is the carved and animated phrasing. These are not summoned creatures or magical constructs in the conventional sense. They are stone statues that were given a rudimentary life through faith. The closest real-world parallel is the golem tradition, most famously associated with Jewish folklore, where a being of inert material is given animated purpose through sacred ritual. The watchdog's cat-like design also connects to the ancient Egyptian concept of sacred guardian animals, particularly Bastet, who watched over the dead. Easter egg 35. The Gideon Ofnir questline and the tragedy of a man who learned too much. Gideon Ofnir presents himself as your ally and advisor at the Round Table Hold, the all-knowing figure who has gathered intelligence from across the lands between. His questline, spread across conversations and item descriptions, gradually reveals that he knows so much about the true nature of the Elden Ring and the greater will that he has concluded the entire enterprise of becoming Elden Lord is meaningless. His boss fight, where he attacks you on the threshold of the final area, is described not as a betrayal, but as an act of mercy, his attempt to spare you from a truth he couldn't handle himself. The detail that makes this resonate is that Gideon was not corrupted by power. He was broken by knowledge. He's a warning about what happens when curiosity reaches its logical conclusion. Easter egg 36. The Dung Eater and the concept of a spiritual inverse. The Dung Eater is one of the most deliberately repulsive characters in the game, a prisoner whose stated goal is to defile every corpse in the lands between so that no soul can be reborn through the Erdtree's cycle. His questline rewards the player with the mending rune of the Fell Curse, which leads to one of the game's endings. What makes the Dung Eater more than just a shock character is the theological precision of his objective. He isn't trying to destroy life, he is trying to permanently end the cycle that governs what happens after death, which is, structurally, the same goal as several other characters in the game, just expressed through the most offensive possible means. Some players have read him as a dark mirror of characters, like Goldmask, who also wants to reform the Elden Ring cycle, but from a position of pure philosophical abstraction. Easter egg 37. The giant conquering hero's grave, and what the giants were fighting for. The giant conquering hero's grave is a late-game catacomb that tells the story of the Erdtree's conquest of the giants, from the winner's side. The graves within belong to warriors who died fighting the giants, commemorated as heroes of the Golden Order. But the item descriptions found throughout, and the visual design of the space also preserve fragments of the giants' own story. The giants were the keepers of the Flame of Ruin, and they were defeated, and their eyes were burned to prevent them from ever again directing that flame at the Erdtree. The detail that the giants had their eyes specifically removed speaks to a fear on the part of the Golden Order that wasn't just military. They didn't just defeat the giants, they dismantled their ability to see. Easter egg 38. The Mausoleum Knights and the concept of loyalty beyond death. The walking mausoleums and the knights who guard them are one of the more striking visual elements in Elden Ring's overworld. The mausoleums themselves are mobile structures that carry the remains of remembrance bosses, allowing duplicate remembrances to be created. The knights guarding them are spectral, and their lore describes them as soldiers who chose to bind their souls to the tombs they guarded rather than move on. The concept of soldiers bound in death to protect their charge is found across world mythology, most prominently in the tradition of funerary warriors in ancient China, Egypt, and pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, where warriors were sometimes killed and interred alongside rulers to protect them in death. The Mausoleum Knights are this tradition made spectral and wandering. Easter egg 39. The nomadic merchants and what their isolation tells you about the world. The nomadic merchants are a group of traders found scattered across the lands between, often sitting alone by fires in isolated areas. Their item descriptions reveal that they were once a connected community of traders who maintained a network of commerce across the continent. The shattering and the chaos that followed destroyed that network, and the merchants who survived were cut off from each other, left to wander alone. Some of their dialogue, if you listen carefully, contains fragments of a song that is implied to be a shared cultural artifact, a piece of music that once connected them all. You hear different fragments from different merchants in different parts of the world. The implication is that somewhere in the game's world, those fragments fit together into something whole, a song that no single merchant can remember in full anymore. Easter egg 40. The map fragments and the act of discovery as a game mechanic. This one is meta in the best possible way. In most open-world games, the map is revealed by exploration, by going to a place and having it appear. In Elden Ring, the map is blank and only filled in when you find a map fragment in the physical world, a stone monolith that holds the surveyed information of a region. You have to seek out the act of knowing, not just the places themselves. This is a deliberate design choice that mirrors the game's lore about the lands between being a place of lost knowledge. The world's history has been broken and scattered. The Elden Ring itself was shattered. The map fragments are the game making that thematic point felt in a mechanical way. You are not exploring a world that gives you its secrets freely. You are reassembling a picture of a world that has been deliberately made hard to read. Easter egg 41. The Deathbird Boss and the Psychopomp Tradition. The Deathbirds are giant crow-like creatures found patrolling certain areas of the lands between, also only at night, like the Knight's Cavalry. Their item lore connects them to the tradition of birds that carry souls of the recently dead, a psychopomp tradition present in dozens of world mythologies. Crows and ravens appear as psychopomps in Norse mythology, Celtic mythology, and numerous Native American traditions. The specific detail that makes the Elden Ring version interesting is that the Deathbirds are described as having lost their purpose when destined death was sealed away. They are creatures built to carry souls onward, flying endlessly in a world where souls can no longer truly leave. The sadness of that condition, a being made for a function that has been rendered impossible, is one of those quiet lore notes that the game never makes explicit but rewards you for noticing. Easter egg 42. The connection between the volcano mana targets and the theme of resistance. The assassination targets sent to you by volcano mana are not random. Each one is a person who, in some capacity, is working to maintain or restore the Erdtree's golden order. Juno Hoslo is a knight associated with a lord of the established hierarchy. Old Knight Istvan is working to protect Godric, who is a demigod clinging to legitimacy. Inquisitor Giza is connected to the White Mask Vara's quest, and by extension to Mohg's hidden network. The pattern that emerges when you look at all the targets together is that Volcano Mana is doing targeted dismantling of the Erdtree's support structures, not out of simple chaos but as a strategic and methodical opposition. Rykard might be insane, and his methods monstrous, but the structure of his operation suggests something more like a resistance movement than a simple villain's court. Easter egg 43. The smithing stones and their connection to ancient geological time. Smithing stones are fragments of the Erdtree's root system, embedded in rock formations throughout the lands between, and their descriptions make clear that they formed over immense geological time, that the Erdtree's roots, growing through stone over millennia, altered the mineral composition of the rock around them. This is the game's way of expressing how old the Erdtree's influence truly is. The stone of the world has been changed at a geological level by the presence of this divine tree, which means that every blade, every piece of armour, every weapon reinforced with smithing stone carries within it the literal substance of divine time. The enhanced properties of upgraded weapons aren't just a game mechanic. They are, in the fiction, a consequence of being strengthened with material that remembers a time before any of the game's current conflicts existed. Easter egg 44. Sir Gideon Ofnir's library and the information hidden in plain sight. The room you find Gideon Ofnir in at the Round Table Hold is lined with shelves and books. You cannot read most of them, but the specific items positioned around the room, the notes visible on his desk, and the scraps of lore available nearby are assembled as if someone laid them out for study. The organisation of these items, when cross-referenced with his dialogue, suggests that Gideon has already reached the conclusions the player will spend many hours working toward. He knows who Melina is. He knows what the Greater Will is. He knows what the Elden Ring truly does and doesn't do. The tragedy of his character, and the Easter egg in this case, is that his room is laid out as evidence of knowledge already assembled. Everything you need to understand the game's true story is in that room. Most players walk past it entirely. Easter egg 45. The fingerprint grape and the recurring motif of divine substance as food. This is a minor item, but one that points toward a recurring theme in Elden Ring's design philosophy. Several consumable items in the game are described in ways that blur the line between sacred material and food. The fingerprint grape The Erd tree's favor talismans implied connection to fruit, the way grace is described as something that feeds the soul. In multiple world religions, consuming sacred substance is a way of absorbing divine power, a concept most visible in Christian Eucharist tradition, but present in Hindu prasad, in ancient Greek ritual sacrifice, and in many indigenous spiritual traditions. Elden Ring treats divine power as something that can be eaten, worn, absorbed, which suggests that the boundary between the sacred and the material in this world is much thinner than the Golden Order would like to admit. Easter egg 46. The Colosseum arenas and what they tell you about before the shattering. The Colosseums added to the game are positioned across the map in locations that once would have been accessible. The lore attached to them describes them as places where Tarnished once competed in combat for the entertainment of the demigods, as a sanctioned outlet for the martial energy of those who bore grace. The interesting detail is the timeline. These arenas were built and used before the shattering, which means there was a period in this world's history where the demigods were stable enough to build entertainment venues. The world of before the shattering, implied throughout the game's lore but never shown directly, must have been extraordinary in its excess and its beauty, which makes the shattered present feel even more like a ruin. The Colosseums are monuments to a time when gods had hobbies. Easter egg 47. The Nox people and their astronomical imprisonment. The Nox are a people found in the hidden eternal cities of the game, the underground civilizations preserved beneath the surface of the lands between. Their lore describes them as having once attempted to forge their own Elden Ring using the power of the stars, which the Greater Will punished by sealing them underground and hiding their cities from the surface world. The Nox are, in a very specific sense, imprisoned astronomers. They reached for the stars and were pushed into the earth. The detail that makes this more than just backstory is the visual design of the eternal cities. They're decorated with stars. The ceilings of the underground are painted or embedded to look like night skies. The Nox were sealed away from the stars they worshipped and responded by recreating them in the only space they had left. Easter egg 48. The Albinaurics and the ethics of artificial life. The Albinaurics are an artificial race created by alchemy in the tradition of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, described as homunculi, beings of manufactured life. Their society is divided into two generations. The first generation are frog-like humanoids who move slowly and suffer from a degenerative condition that gradually petrifies them. The second generation, created as an improvement, are more recognizably human in appearance. The detail that turns this into something uncomfortable is the fact that the Albinaurics, created as experiments, formed their own communities, developed their own culture, and were then systematically persecuted by the powers that created them. The game never takes a position on the ethics of creating artificial life, but it shows you the consequences in detail. The people who made the Albinaurics are never held responsible for what they set in motion. Easter egg 49. The ulcerated tree spirit and the corruption of divine roots. The ulcerated tree spirit is a boss found in several locations, and it appears to be a fragment of the ear tree's root system that has become corrupted or diseased, twisting into a violent, aggressive creature. The lore connected to it is sparse, but the visual design is clear. What was once a sacred root, something that should have been nourishing and golden, has been warped into something that attacks the living. The connection to scarlet rot is present in some versions of this boss, but others suggest a different kind of corruption, one connected to the violence of the shattering itself, as if the tree's root system was damaged by what happened, and some fragments became feral in their pain. This is the game's way of showing that the Erd tree is not invulnerable, that even the divine can be broken and made monstrous. Easter egg 50. The malformed star boss and the horror from outside. The malformed star is a boss found in the underground Lake of Rot area, and it is one of the game's more genuinely cosmic horror moments. It is a creature that appears to be assembled from the material of celestial bodies, a writhing mass of rock and light that fires projectiles and seems fundamentally wrong in a way that's hard to articulate. Its item descriptions place it in the tradition of the outer gods, beings from outside the lands, between whose influence enters the world as something the world was not built to contain. The malformed star doesn't fit. Its design is deliberately incoherent, a visual expression of something that shouldn't be here. In the tradition of H.P. Lovecraft's cosmicism, the horror isn't violence, it's wrongness, the presence of a thing that violates the internal logic of the space it occupies. Easter egg 51. The bell bearings and the economy of the dead. Bell bearings are items dropped by deceased merchants and certain bosses that can be given to the Twin Maiden Husks to add their inventory to the Round Table Hold shop. The mechanical function of this system is convenient, but the lore implication is strange. You are literally taking the commercial legacy of dead traders and feeding it to the husks of former Finger Maidens so that their trade can continue through them. The dead remain economically active in this world. Commerce persists beyond the life of the individual. This is, of course, a reference to the real-world concept of estate and inheritance, of the way that wealth and trade networks outlive individuals, but the game literalizes it in a way that makes it feel slightly uncanny, especially when paired with the visual of the Twin Maiden Husks quietly absorbing the essence of a dead merchant's livelihood. Easter egg 52. Gold Mask and the Silent Saint. Gold Mask is one of the most unusual characters in the game because he never speaks directly to the player. He communicates only through Brother Corin, who acts as his interpreter, and even Corin admits he often doesn't understand what Gold Mask is trying to express. Gold Mask is a philosopher pursuing the concept of a perfect golden order, a world in which the Elden Ring is rebuilt as a perfect expression of law. His ending, the Age of Perfect Order, results in a world so rigid and so complete that it could be read as either paradise or a prison, depending on your values. The detail that makes Goldmask interesting as a character is that his silence is not presented as mystical or divine. It's presented as ordinary, as if he simply decided that language was an inadequate tool for what he was thinking about, and moved on. Easter egg 53. The Flame of Frenzy and its connection to the concept of liberation through madness. The Three Fingers and the Flame of Frenzy are associated with a very specific form of liberation. The item descriptions connected to Frenzied Flame describe it as a force that burns away distinction, that dissolves the boundaries between self and other, between life and death, between clean and unclean. In certain traditions of mystical philosophy, particularly in some strands of Gnosticism and certain Buddhist concepts of ego dissolution, the dissolution of the self is understood as a form of freedom. The frenzied flame ending burns everything, which is presented as horrifying, but the framing within the game's philosophy is ambiguous. The Three Fingers don't offer destruction as punishment. They offer it as the one form of equality available in a world built on hierarchy. Easter egg 54. The connection between the Elden Ring and legal philosophy. This is one that requires a bit of stepping back to see. The Elden Ring is described as the foundation of the Eared Tree's order, the source of law for the lands between. Its shattering led directly to the collapse of that law, the beginning of conflict, the rise of self-appointed demigod rulers. This maps quite precisely onto the legal philosophical concept of the social contract. That order is maintained by a shared agreement about power, and when that agreement breaks, society reverts to a state of conflict. Hobbes described this as the state of nature, a war of all against all. Elden Ring's shattering is that concept made literal. The ring was the contract. Its fragments became the prizes in an ongoing war between parties who no longer shared any common framework. Hidetaka Miyazaki has spoken in interviews about being interested in the structures of society, and this game feels like his most direct engagement with that interest. Easter egg 55. The Clean Rot Knights and what they chose. Malenia's Clean Rot Knights are her personal guard, warriors who remained loyal to her despite or because of her scarlet rot. Their armour descriptions note that they exposed themselves to the rot as an act of devotion, and their bodies bear evidence of that exposure, with rot marks visible beneath their armour. The detail that makes this more than just lore flavour is the word clean rot, which is an oxymoron. The name implies that the rot they carry is somehow pure, that the disease is in their case a form of consecration. This connects to the very old religious tradition of illness as a mark of divine favour, where suffering was understood as a sign of closeness to the divine, not punishment. The Clean Rot Knights didn't survive Malenia's rot. They embraced it as a form of communion. Easter egg 56, the Finger Slayer blade, and what it implies about the cosmos. The Finger Slayer blade is a key item in Rani's questline, a weapon described as capable of wounding the two fingers. The lore attached to it is careful to note that this weapon was created by the Nox people, who were punished for attempting to forge their own Elden Ring. The Nox created a weapon that could wound the messengers of the Greater Will. This detail is significant because it means that the Greater Will's agents are not invulnerable, that the Outer God's control over the lands between has a potential point of failure, and that the Nox found it. The reason this never became a revolution is the punishment the Nox received, but the knowledge they gathered before that punishment was sealed underground with them, where it waited until Rani could find it. Easter egg 57. The Silver Tears and the nature of life made from fluid. The Silver Tears are mirror-like liquid creatures found in the underground eternal cities. Their lore describes them as a form of primordial life, fluid that learned to shape itself, to imitate other forms, to take the appearance of humans or other creatures. The Mimic Tear boss, one of the most memorable encounters in the game, is a silver tear that has copied the player character, creating a reflection of you using only the information it could gather from your presence. The detail that makes silver tears philosophically interesting is that they are defined entirely by imitation. They have no form of their own. They exist as a kind of living reflection, which in mythological traditions across the world is associated with the soul, with identity, and with the dangerous magic of copying what is real. Easter egg 58. The Round Table Hold's location between worlds. The Round Table Hold is accessed through grace, and is described as a place that exists outside the normal space of the lands between. You cannot ride your horse there. The physical rules of the world don't fully apply. It's a sanctuary in the gap between things. The concept of a refuge outside the normal world is found in numerous mythological traditions. The Norse concept of Valhalla as a place outside normal death. The Celtic concept of Tir na Nog as an island existing between the mortal world and the divine. The Arthurian tradition of Avalon as a healing place between worlds. The Round Table Hold is all of these at once, a gathering place for warriors between battles, existing in the space that is neither the world of the living nor the world of the dead, which is exactly the state of every tarnished who finds themselves there. Easter egg 59. Hyetta and the Frenzied Flame questline's tragic irony. Hyetta is an NPC who asks you for shabriri grapes throughout her questline, and who gradually reveals that she's going blind and is seeking guidance toward a light she can sense but not see. The Frenzied Flame questline leads her, and potentially the player, to the Three Fingers, the source of the flame of frenzy. The tragic irony is precise. Hyetta is seeking light. She finds the frenzied flame, and the frenzied flame's light is described as a burning that erases everything. Not a light that illuminates, but one that incinerates. She was not deceived. She was guided toward exactly what she was looking for. The game doesn't editorialize on whether that's a mercy or a cruelty. It just shows you a blind woman walking toward a fire and lets you decide what to feel about it. Easter egg 60. The ancient dragons and their memory of a world before gods. Ancient dragons in Elden Ring, particularly Lanciax and Placidusax, carry lore that describes them as creatures of an age predating the Erd Tree, when the dragons held dominion over the lands between. Dragon communion, the practice of eating dragon hearts to gain their power, is described as a tradition that dates to this earlier age, when humans and dragons were closer in kind than they are now. Dragon Lord Placidusax is particularly interesting because his fight takes place in a temporal echo, a frozen moment outside normal time, and his lore describes him as a lord who lost his god, who was waiting in that frozen moment for a divine patron that never returned. He is, in the game's terms, a being still loyal to a covenant that was dissolved before the current world was assembled. Easter egg 61. The Tibia Mariner and the Hourglass motif. The Tibia Mariner's boat, if you look at it during the fight, is not a conventional vessel. Its shape and the material it appears to be made from has been interpreted by some players as referencing an hourglass shape, the traditional symbol of time's passage and mortality. The mariner itself is a skeleton, which in European visual tradition, from the medieval period onward, was often called the Grim Reaper, or simply death personified. The combination of a skeletal ferryman in a vessel that echoes the shape of an hourglass, fighting in an open field with no obvious body of water, creates an image that points toward death as an abstraction rather than a physical location. Death isn't a place you go to in this world. It's something that comes to you, rowing through the air, on a schedule that was always yours. Easter egg 62. The invisible grace lines and the game's visual language for divine guidance. Throughout Elden Ring, the sights of grace emit a beam of light that points in a general direction, described in-game as the direction of Marika's guidance, the path the Tarnished is meant to follow. This directional beam points toward the next major objective, or toward the Erd Tree, in a general sense. What makes this an Easter egg in a design sense is what happens when you follow these beams off the beaten path. In some cases, they point toward hidden secrets, optional bosses, or lore items that are not part of the main path. The guidance of grace is not a strict instruction. It is, the game seems to suggest, more like a conversation, a pointing finger that says this way, but doesn't say not that way. Easter egg 63. The Clean-bearer servants and the economics of rot. Found in the Haligtree area, the Clean-bearer servants are humanoid enemies who carry large bundles of rot-infected material, walking through the diseased landscape without apparent distress. Their presence suggests an economy of rot management, people whose role is to carry the consequences of Malenia's condition away from the central areas of the tree. The concept of a servant class whose job is to manage the physical manifestations of a powerful person's disease is historically resonant. Medieval European courts employed individuals called night soil men and similar labourers whose jobs were effectively to manage the biological consequences of powerful people's existence. The Haligtree has the same structure. The closer you get to Malenia, the more servants you find whose entire purpose is to manage what her condition produces. Easter egg 64. The Stone Sword Keys and the concept of locked knowledge. Stone Sword Keys are items used to unlock imp statues, which guard fog walls that hide optional areas, loot, and sometimes entire questline branches. The keys themselves are described as ancient tools used to dispel the barriers placed on dangerous or sacred knowledge. In the game's fiction, someone placed imp statues throughout the lands between, to guard things that weren't meant for everyone. The keys were created with the specific intention of bypassing those barriers for those who knew what to look for. This is a direct game design, parallel to the concept of esoteric knowledge in mystery traditions. Information hidden behind barriers that require the right preparation or the right tools to access, with the implication that the knowledge inside is either very valuable or very dangerous, and sometimes both. Easter Egg 65. FEA's questline and the concept of comfort as transaction. Fia, the deathbed companion, offers to hold the player character, an embrace that provides a small buff to your maximum HP in exchange for a debuff to your maximum HP. She takes something. She gives something. The lore around her describes deathbed companions as women who are trained to comfort the dying, to hold them through their final hours, and in doing so, absorb some quality of the champions they accompanied. She is collecting the essence of tarnished champions for a purpose that only becomes clear partway through her questline. The detail that makes Fia more than a comfort mechanic is that her purpose is connected to the Prince of Death, Godwyn the Golden, the first of the demigods to die in the Night of the Black Knives. She is not just offering comfort, she is preparing something, and she needs the proximity of warriors to do it. Easter Egg 66. The Finger Reader Crones and the Tradition of Bone Divination. The Finger Reader Crones are old women who can read the bones and body parts found in the player's inventory, providing lore context for specific items. Their mechanic is unusual, and their visual design is distinctive. Hunched, ancient, their fingers elongated and claw-like. The tradition of reading the future or past through bones, called osteomancy, is documented in ancient China, in African traditional religions, and in various European folk traditions. The finger readers are doing something structurally identical, interpreting the meaning of physical remains, extracting narrative from material. The detail that makes them feel specific to Elden Ring's cosmology is that the bones they read are not random. They are the bones of people and creatures whose stories have specific weight within the game's history. Every bone has a provenance, the crones can read it. Easter Egg 67. The Black Knife Assassins and the Night of the Black Knives. The Black Knife Assassins are a group of female assassins who, on a single night, murdered Godwyn the Golden, using a blade inscribed with destined death. This event, called the Night of the Black Knives, is the inciting incident of the entire game's backstory. Ranni arranged it. The Glomide Queen's power was used to charge the blades, and Godwyn, the first son of Marika, died in a way that had never been possible before, a true death in a world where death had become optional for the powerful. The Easter egg is in the aftermath. Black Knife Assassins are still active in the present day of the game, still carrying black blades, still operating in the dark. They are either maintaining loyalty to a cause that has been running for centuries, or they are something stranger, assassins who cannot complete their assignment because the world they were meant to change still hasn't finished changing. Easter Egg 68. The God-Slayer's Great Sword and the Weapon of Divine Killing. The God-Slayer's Great Sword is associated with the Glomide Queen, the champion who wielded it against gods and demigods before being defeated by Malekith. The weapon's design is a massive curved blade wrapped in black flames that function differently from conventional fire, being associated with destined death. The detail that makes this weapon narratively significant is that God-Slayer weapons exist at all. Someone built a tradition of weapons specifically designed to kill beings who were, in theory, above death. The existence of the God-Slayer tradition implies that divine murder was considered possible and worth preparing for, which in turn implies that the gods of this world were always aware that their power wasn't absolute, that something could be built specifically to end them. Easter Egg 69. The Glintstone Dragon, Adula, and Ranni's companion. Glintstone Dragon Adula is a dragon connected to Ranni's questline, appearing as a mini-boss twice, and as a more subdued presence later in the questline's resolution. Her lore connects her to the lunar magic of the Karian family, and to Rani specifically, suggesting she is one of Rani's loyal companions in the same way Blade and Seluvis are. The detail that's easy to miss is that Adula does not attack Rani. In the areas associated with Rani, Adula's behaviour is protective, not aggressive. This is never explained in dialogue, but the environmental storytelling makes clear that a dragon has chosen to serve a demigod who rejected her own divine birthright, which is either an act of extraordinary loyalty or a sign that Adula's allegiance was never to the Erdtree's order to begin with. Easter egg 70. The Crucible Tree incantation and the shape of early life. The Crucible of Life incantations available in Elden Ring depict the forms that life took in the ancient Crucible period. Tails, breath, branches. The Crucible Tree incantation specifically summons a burst of sacred branches that erupt from the caster's body. The interesting detail here is that tree-like characteristics on a humanoid body are, in the game's lore, associated with the Erdtree's grace. People who receive an enormous amount of grace sometimes begin to physically transform in tree-like ways. The connection between the Crucible Tree incantation and the Erdtree's transformative properties suggests that trees and humans were not originally separate categories in this world, that the ancient Crucible contained the seed of everything that would later be differentiated into distinct life forms, and that the Erdtree is, in some sense, the ultimate expression of what the Crucible always contained. Easter egg 71. The detail in Malenia's arena. Malenia's boss arena, the top of the Haligtree, is decorated with enormous flowers that are clearly the Scarlet Aeonia, the bloom that appears when Malenia unleashes her rot in bloom form. These flowers surround the arena at the start of the fight, before Malenia has used that attack. The implication is that the arena has seen this fight before, that Malenia has fought in this space, released her bloom, and the flowers that grew from it are still there. She hasn't been fighting you for the first time. She has been fighting endlessly in this space, and the garden of rot around you is the accumulated evidence of those previous battles. You're walking into a room decorated with the history of her violence. The flowers are beautiful. That's the point. Easter egg 72. The flying dragon Agil and the legacy of ancient dragon covenants. Flying dragon Agil is an early game dragon boss found in Dragonburnt ruins, and his presence there is notable because the ruins beneath him suggest a settlement that was destroyed, presumably by dragonfire. The Covenant of Dragon Communion, the practice of consuming dragon hearts to gain incantations, has a site of practice in the same general region. The implication is that Agil isn't just an aggressive wild creature. He may be protecting the ruins of a place associated with the Dragon Communion tradition, guarding a site that was sacred to an older order. The destroyed ruins beneath him suggest that someone else, at some point, thought it was worth going there. Whether they went to worship or to plunder is unclear. What's clear is that Agil is still there, and they are not. Easter egg 73. The talisman pouch and the concept of portable sacred objects. Talisman pouches are items that expand the number of talismans the player can equip, and their lore describes them as containers blessed by grace, designed to hold sacred objects without diminishing their power. The concept of a container specifically designed to hold multiple sacred objects simultaneously without interference is a direct reference to the real-world tradition of reliquaries and amulet pouches found in multiple religious traditions, from European Christian reliquaries to West African mojo bags to Hindu amulet containers. The lore note that these pouches are blessed to allow simultaneous use of multiple talismans points toward the idea that divine objects, in this world, normally interfere with each other when brought into proximity, which is why special preparation is required to carry more than one. Easter egg 74. The two fingers' physical appearance and cosmic insignificance. The two fingers, when you finally see them in person, are deeply strange objects. They appear to be exactly what they're called: two enormous, twitching, fleshly fingers, connected to no visible body, sitting in a room at the round table hold and making sounds that the finger maidens translate as divine will. The details that make this image so unsettling are the suggestions of what the rest of the being they belong to must be like. If these are fingers, the hand they belong to is the size of a building. The creature they belong to exists somewhere else entirely, and these two extremities are what it extends into this world to communicate. The three fingers, by comparison, are found underground, in a space that requires the player to strip themselves of everything, and their appearance is more desperate, more reaching, as if they are a broken version of the same vast limb. Easter egg 75. The wandering mausoleum bell and the sound that stops time. The walking mausoleums make a distinctive bell sound as they move, and this sound has a specific in-game function. White bell mausoleums can duplicate boss remembrances. The bells toll as the mausoleum walks, and the lore describes the sound as one that honors the dead within. In multiple world traditions, bells are used to mark the passage of time, to mark death, and specifically to suspend normal activity in honor of something sacred. Church bells in Christian tradition, temple bells in Buddhist and Hindu practice all serve a similar function of momentarily separating the listener from ordinary time. The mausoleum bells do this literally. They mark the presence of a sanctified dead, walking through the world, carrying a memory that can be made to persist. Easter egg 76. The Fia questline's ending and the unborn dead. Fia's questline culminates in the creation of the mending rune of the Death Prince, a fragment of power associated with Godwyn's cursed existence. Godwyn died in a unique way during the Night of the Black Knives. His soul died, but his body remained alive and continues to grow, extending its roots through the deep-root depths beneath the lands between. The Death Prince referred to in the rune is the entity that should have been born from this situation, a being that represents death reintegrated into life. Fia wanted to bear this prince into the world, to give death a face and a form, rather than the rootless, corrupted growth that Godwyn's failed death has produced. The ending she enables is not about destruction, it's about completion. The dead should be allowed to die. The game has just spent 100 hours at explaining why that's harder than it sounds. Easter egg 77. The Radan Festival and the cosmic horror of a containment measure. The Radan Festival, which Jarberg NPC Diallos' brother organises, and which players attend as willing combatants, is presented as a celebration of martial glory. The truth, which surfaces through item descriptions and NPC dialogue, is that the festival is a mercy-killing operation. Radan has been driven mad by Scarlet Rot and is too powerful for any conventional force to put down. The festival provides enough combatants that one, theoretically, might succeed. The cosmic horror element, identified by players who followed the astrology lore, is that Radan was using his gravity magic to hold the stars in place. He was preventing celestial events from occurring, specifically the fall of a star that would reveal the location of Nokron, the eternal city which Rani needed. By defeating Radan at the festival, the player unknowingly releases the stars he was holding, allowing the meteor to fall, which is necessary for the plot to proceed, but is also, in the game's terms, a man's life being spent as a key. Easter egg 78. The Weeping Evergale and what imprisonment means in this world. Evergales are prison constructs, scattered throughout the lands between, each containing a specific enemy or boss. The lore describes them as magical prisons created by the Erdtree's order to contain individuals deemed too dangerous or too heretical for conventional imprisonment. What makes the Evergales interesting as a concept is the specificity of what's imprisoned inside them. Many of the Evergale prisoners are not evil in any obvious sense. They are people whose particular power, belief, or identity conflicted with the Golden Order's requirements. The Crucible Knight in an Evergale represents the ancient order the Erdtree replaced. The various sorcerers and warriors imprisoned in others represent the variety of challenges the Golden Order faced and chose to seal away rather than engage with. The Evergales are a map of everything the Erdtree's civilization found threatening enough to imprison, but not threatening enough to destroy. Easter egg 79. The Troll Caravan enemies and the economy of war. The troll carriages found across the lands between, often with treasure chests in the back, and trolls pulling them, represent a logistical detail of military civilization that most games don't bother with. Someone is moving resources across a war-torn landscape. The trolls are being used as draft animals for what appears to be a supply chain. The detail that makes this more than just a game design convenience is that many of the carriages carry very specific items, smithing materials, potions, rare ingredients. Someone is still organizing and moving resources in a world that has been at war for decades. Commerce and logistics continue even when the political superstructure has collapsed. The trolls pulling the carriages didn't choose any of this. They are, as draft animals in the real world have always been, the muscle of a system they didn't design and can't leave. Easter egg 80. The Great Sword and the meme that reveals a secret community. The Great Sword, an enormous two-handed blade found in a chest in Caelid, became famous among players as the closest equivalent to Guts' Dragonslayer sword from the Berserk manga. The game features numerous references to Berserk throughout, which is widely acknowledged given Miyazaki's stated admiration for the series, but the Great Sword specifically triggered a community-wide recognition moment. The item description references the sword being discarded, too large for any ordinary purpose, as if left behind by someone of extraordinary strength. This mirrors the Dragonslayer's origin in Berserk almost exactly. The Easter egg here is less about any single hidden detail and more about the acknowledgement that both pieces of fiction are engaged in the same conversation about what it means to carry an impossible burden and be defined by a weapon no one else can lift. Easter egg 81. The astrologer starting class and its connection to real astrological traditions. The astrologer starting class in Elden Ring is associated with the Academy's tradition of star-based sorcery, using the energy of celestial bodies to produce magical effects. The real-world astrological tradition from which this draws has roots in ancient Babylon, where court astrologers studied the stars not as metaphors, but as literal expressions of divine will, believing that celestial events corresponded directly to earthly outcomes. The Academy's sorcery tradition in Elden Ring has the same underlying structure. The stars have power, and that power can be channeled by those trained to perceive and work with it. The difference between the Academy's version and ancient astrology is that in Elden Ring, the stars are also sources of raw material, of glintstone, meaning the cosmic bodies have both spiritual and physical significance simultaneously. Easter egg 82. The demi-human chiefs and the suppressed peoples. The demi-humans are humanoid creatures with animal features who appear throughout the lands between in hostile groups. Their item descriptions portray them as one of the older peoples of this world, beings who once had a more significant place in the order of things and who have been marginalized by the rise of the Erdtree's golden civilization. The demi-human chiefs who lead them wear crude approximations of human clothing and carry improvised weapons, details that suggest they're attempting to maintain a culture under conditions of severe oppression. The lore never gives them a heroic narrative or a redemption arc. They are presented as threats to the player, but their item descriptions tell a parallel story of a people reduced to caricature by a history that chose not to include them, which is a quiet and uncomfortable comment on how marginalized peoples are typically represented in fantasy media. Easter egg 83. The ghost soldier ashes and the preservation of last moments. The various spirit ashes found throughout Elden Ring represent the last echoes of warriors and creatures, their fighting spirits preserved at the moment of death and made available for summoning. The detail that makes this more than just a game mechanic is the specificity of some of the ashes. The Lutel, the headless ash, for example, summons a headless knight who fights with the same competence she would have had alive. She doesn't know she's dead, or she knows and doesn't stop. The preservation of a fighting spirit at the moment of death points toward the Elden Ring world's complicated relationship with endings, a world where nothing fully stops, where even a severed head or a dead warrior's final moment can be bottled and reused. The ashes are museums. Each one contains the last second of someone's existence. Easter egg 84. The Jar people and the concept of the body as vessel. The Jar people, of whom Alexander is the most prominent representative, are humanoid beings who live inside large ceramic jars. Their lore describes them as beings who have taken the concept of the warrior jar to its logical extension, filling themselves with the remains of fallen warriors to absorb their essence. The pottery jar, as a container for the soul or for sacred substance, has a long history in world mythology. In ancient Egypt, canopic jars held the organs of the mummified dead. In Greek tradition, amphorae held wine and oil in ways associated with divine blessing. In West African traditions, sacred vessels hold the spirits of ancestors. The Jar people are the Elden Ring's version of this tradition, made anthropomorphic. The vessel is not a container for a person, but the person themselves. Easter egg 85. The Black Knife armor and the detail of silence. The Black Knife armor set has a specific description detail that most players read quickly and move on from. It notes that the armor is enchanted to silence the wearer's footsteps. This is a practical assassin's tool, but in the context of the Knight of the Black Knives, the Knight of Divine Murder, the silence has a different quality. A divine being, Godwyn, was murdered by someone who made no sound, in a world where divine protection is enforced by the gods and their agents. The ability to be silent is the ability to be outside the notice of heart power. The Black Knife assassins didn't just have weapons capable of killing gods. They had armor capable of approaching gods without being perceived. The combination of a god-killing blade and silence suggests that the tools of divine murder require two equal components: the capability to kill and the capability to not be seen. Easter egg 86. The Tree Sentinel and his connection to divine protectors. The Tree Sentinel is the first real boss that most players encounter in the open world of Elden Ring, mounted on a golden horse and patrolling the road in front of the first major settlement. His armor and his halberd are both associated with the Eared Tree's order, and his patrol route brings him around and around the same stretch of road in an endless circuit. The Tree Sentinel is not aggressive toward travelers in general. He is specifically aggressive toward the Tarnished. His patrol is specifically designed to prevent the ungraced from passing. The detail this points toward is the nature of his creation. He is a guardian who has been running his route for so long that he no longer questions why. He is protecting a road that leads to a church that no longer functions as intended, maintaining a boundary that the world has largely moved past because no one has ever told him to stop. Easter egg 87. The Great Shields and the Heraldry of the Fallen. Several great shields in Elden Ring carry heraldic designs on their faces, crests and emblems that reference the houses and factions of the game's political history. The Erdtree Great Shield carries the obvious golden tree. The Dragon Cult prayer book is associated with a lightning heraldry. The Carian Knight's shield bears the Carian star pattern. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they are documents. The person who carried each shield was publicly declaring an allegiance, wearing their theological and political commitments on a surface specifically designed to face the enemy. In medieval European tradition, heraldry was a legal and social document as much as a decorative choice. Finding a shield with a crest in the ruins of the lands between is finding evidence of a person who publicly, visibly committed to something that no longer exists. Easter egg 88. The Yellow Annex ruins and the Nox language. Scattered throughout the underground eternal cities are inscriptions and visual elements that appear to be in a script different from the standard writing of the lands between. Some fans have spent significant time attempting to decode these inscriptions, though no official translation exists. The presence of a distinct written language in the underground civilization of the Nox speaks to the extent of their cultural development before the Greater Will's punishment. They had their own language, their own script, their own way of recording knowledge. The cities they were sealed into weren't just physical refuges. They were entire civilizations, complete with the administrative and intellectual infrastructure that requires written language. The sealed cities didn't just preserve the Nox's bodies, they preserved everything that made them a people. Easter egg 89. The sorcerer Rogier and his investigation into the Night of the Black Knives. Sorcerer Rogier's questline is a quiet and melancholy piece of detective fiction embedded within the larger game. He arrives at Stormvale Castle as an independent researcher, falls through the floor into the subterranean shunning grounds, and discovers evidence there connected to Godwyn's death. The detail that makes his questline particularly interesting is what he finds and what he does with it. He finds a corpse, one of Godwyn's echoes, pressed against the stone in the catacombs beneath the capital. He becomes partially corrupted by contact with it, and then rather than reporting what he found or continuing his investigation, he returns to the round table hold and waits. He has found something he doesn't know what to do with. His eventual fate, dying quietly in a chair while still processing what he saw, is the game's statement about knowledge that is true, but inactionable. Easter egg 90. The Glintblade Phalanx and its visual echo of ancient warfare. The Glintblade Phalanx sorcery summons a ring of magical blades that orbit the caster and fire automatically when enemies approach. The phalanx formation of ancient Greek warfare involves soldiers locking shields and presenting an array of spear points to the enemy, creating a defensive, offensive structure that was essentially impenetrable when maintained properly. The Glintblade Phalanx takes this concept and makes it magical. Instead of soldiers with spears, a single caster produces a ring of autonomous blades that maintain formation around them. The lore attached to this sorcery doesn't reference the phalanx tradition explicitly, but the name is direct enough that it points toward the Academy's sorcerers having been students of military history as well as cosmic philosophy, designing their defensive spells on the models of the greatest military formations in human history. Easter egg 91. The isolated divine tower and what the severed fingers mean. The divine towers are structures scattered across the lands, between that are connected to the great runes held by the demigods. To restore a great rune to its full power, the player must bring it to the corresponding divine tower and activate it there. The isolated divine tower is unusual because it appears to correspond to no demigod currently present in the game. Its rune slot seems to belong to a being who no longer exists in the standard playthrough. The implication, supported by cut content and community research, is that this tower belonged to Godwyn, the first demigod to die. There is no longer a Godwyn to bring a rune to this tower. The tower still stands. The mechanism still works. The tower is waiting for something that will never arrive, performing a function for a person who is gone, which in the game's quiet symbolic language represents how the world continues to maintain structures built for beings that no longer exist. Easter egg 92. The Flame of Godwyn and what death has become. Godwyn the Golden is, in the lore, one of the most tragic figures in the game. the first child of Marika to die, killed in a way that split his death from his soul. His soul died. His body lived. His body continued to grow, sending roots through the stone beneath the lands between. His face appearing in dozens of locations on corpses who died near his corrupted remains. The death blight status effect associated with these roots turns the living into stone. Godwyn is, in death, still claiming the world, still growing, still consuming. And unlike the other demigods who are dead and done or alive and fighting, Godwyn exists in a third state, a thing that cannot be properly spoken to or fought or reasoned with, that continues to spread because stopping was simply never part of his available options anymore. Easter egg 93. The Caria Manor hand spiders and what they represent. In Caria Manor, the player encounters a particularly disturbing enemy type, crawling hands with eye-like fingers skittering across the floors and walls. These enemies are associated with the Carian school of sorcery, and their visual design is understood by most players as a direct reference to the fingers, the divine messengers of the outer gods. The Carian family had a different relationship with the cosmos than the Erdtree's Golden Order, one connected to the moon and the stars rather than the grace of the tree. The hand spiders suggest that their sorcery pushed into contact with something that responded in kind. If the outer gods communicate through fingers, it makes a strange kind of sense that a family whose sorcery reached toward those outer gods would eventually encounter what their reaching summoned. The hands didn't come from nowhere. Someone in the Carian lineage opened a door. Easter egg 94. The Church of Ella and the Ruined Beginning. The Church of Ella, the first landmark most players reach after leaving the tutorial, is a ruined church dedicated to an unnamed divine figure. Merchant Kale sits inside its walls. A site of grace glows in the corner, and the building itself is partially collapsed, open to the sky, its roof long gone. The detail that makes this opening location so deliberately designed is that it establishes the visual language of the entire game in miniature. The world of Elden Ring is defined by buildings that once served sacred purposes and now serve whatever purposes the present requires. The Church of Ella was a place of worship. Now it's a merchant's camp and a traveller's rest. The divine function of the space has been replaced by practical necessity, which is the story of the lands between in one small building. Easter egg 95. The prisoner starting class and its implied backstory. The prisoner starting class begins with the player character wearing an iron mask and holding a glintstone staff, suggesting a sorcerer who was imprisoned by the Academy for some infraction. The iron mask is specifically the design used by the Academy for heretics, people who had access to knowledge they weren't supposed to have and were kept alive but contained. The prisoner's starting statistics reflect someone who developed skills under conditions of constraint, with a focus on sorcery and intelligence, but also a notable survival instinct reflected in their vigour. The implied backstory suggests someone who was studying something the Academy didn't sanction, got caught, was imprisoned, survived somehow, and is now loose in the world with a very particular skill set and a score to settle. The mask stays on. You don't find out what's underneath. The game never asks you to remove it. Easter egg 96, the Zamor Ice Storm incantation and the legacy of the Zamor Knights. Zamor Ice Storm is a sorcery connected to the Zamor Knights, a group of warriors associated with the mountaintops of the giants who served the ancient giant civilization before its destruction. The Zamor Knights themselves are a detail that could be easily missed because they appear only in that late game area, and their lore is distributed across only a few items. But what those items describe is the remnant of a culture, warriors who served the giants and who maintained their traditions even after the giants were defeated, who preserved their magical techniques and passed them down through generations long after the civilization that created those techniques was gone. The ice storm they left behind is the fossilized magic of a dead culture, a technique kept alive by loyalty to a people who exist only in memory. Easter egg 97. The grafted dragon and what it means that a dragon can be grafted. The grafted dragon is a weapon, specifically a fist weapon, that appears to be a dragon's head grafted onto a gauntlet. Its description connects it to Godric, who grafted it to himself in battle when his conventional weapons proved insufficient. The detail that the grafting of a dragon's head is treated as simply another body part available for Godric's collection reveals something about how the Golden Order viewed the ancient dragon civilization. Dragons, which were once the dominant species of the lands between, have been so thoroughly defeated that their heads can be grafted onto human bodies as weapons. A species that once held dominion over the entire world has been reduced to raw material. The grafted dragon is not a tribute to dragon power. It is a trophy. Easter egg 98. The Lanedale sewers and the things thrown away. The Lanedale sewers, accessible from multiple points in the capital, are filled with waste and discarded things, including enemies, items, and lore. The concept of a city's waste infrastructure as a repository of everything the city chose not to acknowledge is a classic literary device, but Elden Ring uses it with unusual specificity. The omens were thrown into the sewers. The subterranean shunning grounds are directly beneath the sewers. Godwyn's corrupted growth extends into this space. The layer beneath the Golden Capital accumulates everything the Golden Order rejected: the marked, the cursed, the monstrous, the dead. The political message here is hard to miss. Every civilization has a sewer, and the sewer always contains the people and the ideas that the civilization above decided it didn't want to look at. Easter egg 99. The tiara of the Dusk Crown Ring and the connection to time. The Dusk Crown Ring is a talisman that boosts sorcery power at the cost of maximum HP. It references the concept of dusk, which is not night, but the transition between day and dark, the in-between moment. The Dusk Crown Ring suggests that the most power is available at the edge of things, at the moment just before darkness, at the limit rather than the centre. This is a recurring theme in the game's design philosophy. The spaces between states are where the most significant forces live. The Fingerprint Grove is between life and death. The Round Table Hold is between worlds. The dusk is between day and night. The most powerful sorcery, this talisman suggests, lives at the edge of what can be sustained. Easter egg 100. The 100 milestone. You've made it to 100. There are 320 more to go. The night is long in the lands between, and we are only just beginning. Easter egg 101. The Erd Tree Avatar and the concept of a divine immune response. The Erd Tree Avatars are large bosses found guarding minor Erd trees scattered across the map. They are, visually, essentially pieces of the Erd tree that have been given animating purpose and sent out to protect its offshoots. Their item drops include materials associated with the Erd tree's sacred wood. The concept they most closely parallel is that of an immune response, a biological system that detects threats and sends specialized agents to neutralize them. The minor Erd trees are extensions of the main tree's root system and spiritual network, and the avatars are what happens when those extensions are threatened. The Erd tree doesn't mobilize armies. It mobilizes the equivalent of antibodies, specialized, targeted, aggressive guardians that exist for no purpose other than protection of the whole. The intelligence that directs them is not personal. It is systemic. Easter egg 102. The deprived starting class and the absurdity of equality. The deprived starting class, a tradition in From Software games, gives every stat an equal value, begins with no weapons or equipment worth mentioning, and is described as someone who has been stripped of everything. The deprived is, in statistical terms, the most balanced character in the game at the start, and in practical terms, the weakest. The Easter egg here is philosophical. True equality, the state of having nothing differentiated about you, is not strength, it is vulnerability. The deprived's design suggests that the starting point for maximum flexibility is also the starting point for maximum fragility, and that the game's progressive specialization mechanics are not constraints on freedom, but the process by which freedom is made meaningful through commitment. You are nobody until you decide who to be. Easter egg 103. The Sword of Night and Flame and its dual nature. The Sword of Night and Flame is a weapon that embodies the two great powers of the lands between, the flame of the Ear Tree's sacred fire and the lunar magic of the night's sorcery. Its item description notes that it was one of the treasured possessions of the Carian royal family and suggests it was made during a period when those two traditions were in dialogue rather than conflict. The weapon combines what are, in the present of the game's story, opposed cosmological forces, which means it is either a relic of an earlier, less polarized time, or an expression of something the game's present has forgotten. That fire and night, gold and silver, day and dark, are not enemies but aspects of the same complete system. The sword holds both at once. Whether the world it came from could do the same is the question the game poses with it. Easter egg 104. The Erd Tree's gold and what it is made of. The golden colour of the Erd Tree and of grace is described in various item descriptions as the colour of order, of the greater will's law made visible. But some descriptions, particularly those associated with the Elden Star's miracle and the Erd Tree burial tradition, suggest that what looks like gold is actually something more like light compressed to a density where it takes on the properties of material substance. The Erd Tree's glow is not paint or mineral. It is, the lore seems to suggest, light that has become something you can touch. The philosophical resonance of this is that what looks like wealth is actually radiance, which in mystical traditions from Christianity to Buddhism is the light of the divine made accessible to human perception. The Erd Tree's gold is not a metaphor for power. It is a materialized form of divine perception. Easter egg 105. The giant skeleton on the mountaintops. In the mountaintops of the giants, there is a colossal skeleton that simply lies in the landscape, partially buried in snow. There is no boss fight attached to it. There is no item description that specifically names it. It is simply there, a remnant of something vast that died in this place long ago. The scale of it, when you stand next to it, makes the player character appear miniature. Whatever this was, it was larger than any giant you fight in the game. It was larger than any creature the game explicitly acknowledges. The unnamed skeleton in the snow is a classic piece of From Software environmental storytelling, a suggestion that the history you're playing through is only the latest layer of a much deeper sequence of events, that things happened here whose scale exceeds what you've been shown, and the evidence of them is simply the bones left behind. Easter egg 106. The Bloodhound's Fang and the Knight's Broken Story. The Bloodhound's Fang is dropped by Bloodhound Knight Darrowil, an Evergale prisoner. Its description tells a spare, sad story. Darrowil was a knight who betrayed his master in an unspecified way, was imprisoned, and the weapon he carries still bears the notch from his master's blade. The betrayal is not elaborated. The master is not named. The context is not provided. The weapon is just a curved blade with a story told in a single detail, a notch that speaks to a whole conflict compressed into metal. This is the game at its best in terms of environmental and item storytelling, not explaining everything, trusting the player to fill in a narrative from physical evidence. Darrowil betrayed someone who loved him enough to try to stop him personally. The notch in the blade is where that love ran out. Easter egg 107. The detail in Renala's room after her defeat. After defeating Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, she does not disappear. She remains in her library, sitting on the floor with her children around her, rocking in place, cradling the amber egg she's been protecting. The amber egg, her description notes, is a gift from Radagon, the husband who left her. She's been told that it contains the grace of the Erd tree, and that if she protects it, she will be reunited with what she loves. She is, by any functional definition, not well. She is a person in profound grief who has organized her remaining energy around protecting an object associated with the person who caused her pain. The game gives you access to her as a rebirth mechanic after you defeat her, but it doesn't remove her from the room, because the point isn't the boss fight. The point is the person sitting on the floor after. Easter egg 108. The Night Cavalry's patrol and the pattern they trace. The Night Cavalry patrol specific roads at night, returning to their starting positions by morning, following fixed routes. If you map these routes against the game's wider geography, many of them trace paths that were clearly once significant roads or patrol lines during an earlier era of the Lands Between's history. Some routes connect ruins to other ruins, or pass by locations that are now empty but that bear evidence of former populations. The Night Cavalry are, in this reading, ghosts of a garrison system, soldiers maintaining security checkpoints for a state that no longer exists, patrolling boundaries between territories that have been dissolved for decades. Their persistence speaks to the way institutions outlive the contexts that created them, continuing to enforce rules long after the rulers who made those rules are gone. Easter egg 109. The Clean Rot Night incantation lore and the purification paradox. The Holy Ground incantation, associated with the Clean Rot Night tradition, creates a zone of golden light that heals the player and damages undead. The irony embedded in an incantation from millennia's tradition, being holy, is deliberate. The Erd tree's golden order considers scarlet rot a form of divine punishment, a mark of divine disfavour. Millennia's clean rot knights, carriers of the rot, nonetheless use an incantation that creates holy ground, which suggests that their brand of holiness and the Erd tree's brand of holiness are not as different as the Golden Order would prefer. The ground they consecrate is sacred. The method of its consecration involves a being the Erd tree considers cursed. The game is pointing toward the conclusion that sanctity is not determined by the endorsement of the dominant religious authority, but by the nature of the power being expressed. Easter egg 110. The hidden cave near the first step. Near the very beginning of the game, close to the first step site of grace, where the player character first truly enters the lands between, there is a small cave that many players enter briefly and dismiss as an early resource cave. However, if you follow its path and examine the item descriptions of everything found inside, there is a micro-narrative embedded in the placement of objects, bones, and equipment that describes a tarnished who came before you, who reached this same starting point, who went into this cave, and who didn't come back out. The game begins with the implication that you are not the first person to try this. Other tarnished have responded to the call of grace before you. Many of them died within sight of where they started. The cave is the game's first honest statement about what lies ahead. Easter egg 111. Millennia's Waterfowl Dance and its origin. Millennia's Waterfowl Dance, the attack that has killed more players than any other single move in Elden Ring's history, is a multi-hit flurry of slashes that is almost uniquely deadly. But the attack's name and visual design point toward a specific tradition. The crane dances of Japanese classical performance, particularly the surumai, where dancers imitate the flowing, precise movements of cranes or herons. The waterfowl comparison in the attack name points toward a tradition of martial arts that imitated waterbirds, a tradition found in multiple East Asian martial arts forms, including some styles of kung fu and certain forms of tai chi. Millennia's deadliest attack is not a wild assault. It is a performance. It is a dance that she has perfected to such a degree that it has become lethal, which is a detail about her character that goes beyond combat design. Easter egg 112. The catacombs and what they preserve. The catacombs scattered throughout the lands between are not random dungeons. Each one is associated with a specific regional culture and contains the remains of warriors and priests from that culture. The Black Knife catacombs contain evidence of the assassin tradition. The Wyndham catacombs connect to the legacy of the Wyndham ruins above. The Giant's mountaintop catacombs contain evidence of both the giant conquering campaign and the culture that preceded it. The enemies you fight in each catacomb are, in a real sense, the guardians of the specific dead interred there. Every catacomb is a specific archaeological site, not a generic dungeon, and the game rewards players who pay attention to the differences between them by revealing the texture of a world that had distinct regional cultures long before any single divine order tried to unify them. Easter egg 113. The Stone Digger Troll and its tools. The Stone Digger Trolls found in various mines throughout the game are equipped with crude pickaxes and appear to have been used as mining labour. Their item descriptions don't romanticize this. They describe large, not particularly intelligent creatures put to work in dangerous conditions for the benefit of whoever operates the mines. The mines themselves contain smithing materials of significant value, and the presence of enslaved labour in the extraction of these materials connects the economy of weapon improvement, something the player engages with constantly, to a foundation of coerced labour. The game doesn't make this point loudly, it just puts trolls with pickaxes in the mines where the materials come from and lets you notice. Easter egg 114. The Moonveil Katana and its dual identity. The Moonveil is a katana with a glintstone edge that allows for a spectacular light-based Ash of War attack. Its description places it in the tradition of weapons created by the Academy of Raya Lucaria, infused with the power of the stars. But the visual design of the weapon's sheath and handle borrows heavily from Japanese sword aesthetics, specifically the tanto and katana traditions of the Edo period. The juxtaposition of Japanese sword aesthetics with Academy glintstone sorcery creates a weapon that exists at the intersection of two distinct cultural traditions, one real and one invented, and the combination works because both traditions share an emphasis on precision, on the blade as an extension of mental discipline rather than merely physical force. The Moonveil's signature attack is not about power, it is about accuracy at the speed of light. Easter egg 115. The giant lobsters and their location near ancient ruins. The giant lobsters found in coastal areas and near bodies of water in the lands between are larger than any real-world crustacean, and their placement is consistently near ancient ruins or sites associated with lost civilizations. The detail that some community members have noted is that lobsters, as creatures, are biologically ancient. They have existed in forms recognizable to the modern eye for over 100 million years. They outlast civilizations. They are, as a class of organism, survivors of extinction-level events that ended countless other species. The giant lobsters in Elden Ring's world are not just enemy placements. They are, in the context of a world built on the ruins of multiple successive civilizations, a visual representation of the persistence of life beneath the noise of divine politics. The civilizations rise and fall. The lobsters remain. Easter egg 116. The mending runes and what they say about restoration. The various mending runes found throughout the game, which enable different endings depending on which one the player uses, each carry descriptions that articulate a specific philosophical position about what was wrong with the Elden Ring and how it should be fixed. Gold Musk's rune emphasizes perfect law. Afia's rune emphasizes the integration of death. The Dung Eater's rune emphasizes the dissolution of the rebirth curse. Each rune is, in essence, a position paper written in divine material, a philosophical argument encoded in the substance of cosmic order. The game is asking the player to choose, not between good and evil, but between competing philosophical frameworks for what a functional divine order looks like. The correct answer, if there is one, is left entirely to the player. Easter egg 117. The sleeping dragons and the concept of ancient patience. Several ancient dragons found in the game are not immediately hostile. They sit or lie in specific locations, apparently sleeping or resting, and only become aggressive when directly engaged. The detail that makes this more than just a design choice is the lore implication. These are creatures from an earlier age who have survived long enough to see the current age, who have outlasted the civilization that fought them, who have simply been waiting. Ancient patience, the capacity to remain dormant for centuries while the world changes around you, is a trait associated in multiple mythological traditions, with the most powerful and primordial beings, the sleeping gods of the Norse Ragnarok cycle, the dreaming elder gods of Lovecraftian mythology. The sleeping dragons in Elden Ring are borrowing from this tradition, presenting patience itself as a form of power. Easter egg 118. The detail on the Malekith fight and the nature of Black Blades. Malekith, the Black Blade, is Marika's shadow and her beast, a creature bound to protect her and to carry within himself the sealed power of destined death. During his boss fight, he wields a weapon that deals Black Blade damage, reducing your maximum HP as it hits. This mechanic, unique to this fight, expresses something specific about what destined death actually does. It doesn't just damage, it reduces potential. It takes away not just current life, but maximum life, the ceiling of what you can be. This is a precise mechanical expression of what death is in the game's philosophical framework. Not just an ending, but a narrowing, a reduction of possibility. The Black Blade doesn't kill you faster, it makes you smaller. That's what destined death does to the divine. Easter egg 119. The floating ruins in Farum Azula and the concept of suspended time. Crumbling Farum Azula is, visually, one of the most extraordinary areas in the game. A shattered citadel that exists in a state of temporal suspension, its pieces floating in a stormy sky, connected by nothing except the implicit architecture of a space that was once whole. The lore describes it as an ancient city that existed in a time before the Elden Ring's order, before the current age. The time there moves differently. The enemies there are ancient dragons and beastmen, both remnants of earlier civilizations. The visual design of the place, beautiful and broken and suspended at the moment of its destruction, points toward the concept of a place caught at the moment, just before its ending, hanging in that moment forever. It is the architectural equivalent of the deathbird's condition, a thing that was supposed to end and couldn't. Easter egg 120. The wet blades and the philosophy of sharpening. The wet blades found throughout the game allow the player to add different affinities to their weapons, changing the fundamental nature of the damage they deal. The black wet blade adds blood poison and occult affinities. The sacred wet blade adds holy and fire. Each wet blade is found in a location associated with its affinity tradition. The detail that makes this system more than just a crafting mechanic is the philosophical implication. The nature of a weapon is not fixed. By applying the right stone to a blade, you can change what it is fundamentally capable of. This is an idea with roots in real alchemy and real metallurgy, the concept that the transformation of material properties is possible through the application of the right technique. The wet blades are teaching the player that nothing in this world is as fixed as it appears. Easter egg 121, Rani's doll body and the concept of voluntary disembodiment. On the night of the Black Knives, Rani performed a ritual that separated her soul from her body and placed her soul into a small doll form to escape the fate her mother had planned for her. She sacrificed her body, her warmth, her physical existence, to gain freedom from a divine plan she rejected. The concept of voluntary disembodiment as an act of spiritual liberation has precedence in several religious traditions, most prominently in certain streams of Gnostic thought, where the physical body was considered a cage rather than a home, and transcending it was the highest possible achievement. Rani's choice to live in a doll body is not framed as a tragedy. It is presented as a consequence of a choice she made with full knowledge of the cost, which makes her, in the game's moral economy, one of the few characters who is truly free. Easter egg 122. The Rune Arc and the Accumulated Grace of the Dead. Rune Arcs are consumable items that activate the player's great rune until they die. They are described as fragments of grace that have been gathered and concentrated. Their method of acquisition includes trading with various characters and finding them in the world. What their lore suggests, without stating directly, is that the fragments of grace within rune arcs come from other tarnished who died while their great rune was active. The grace doesn't disappear. It leaves a trace, a fragment that can be collected and used again. This means that the rune arcs you use to empower yourself are, in the game's logic, built from the residual power of every tarnished who came before you and failed. Their power becomes yours. Their failure is the foundation of your attempt. Easter egg 123. The Uhel Palace ruins and the Nox prisoners. The Uhel Palace ruins in Liurnia contain a population of Nox enemies, the underground people who were sealed away by the Greater Will. Their presence on the surface is unusual and is never fully explained by any single item description, but several clues point toward the possibility that this ruin was a place where Nox individuals escaped from or were brought to the surface world. The Nox enemies found here still carry the silver weapons, and wear the armour associated with their underground civilization, suggesting they haven't been on the surface long enough to adapt. They are outsiders in their own world, people whose ancestors were sealed underground, and who have now found a way out, only to arrive in a world that has no place for them. Easter egg 124. The Finger Reader Crone near the Round Table Hold. There is a Finger Reader Crone who can be found in close proximity to the Round Table Hold, and her dialogue includes observations about the hold itself, about the tarnished who gather there, and about the state of the lands between, that are notably more specific than the dialogue of other crones in the game. She seems to have access to information about the Round Table Hold as an institution that she shouldn't have as an outsider. Some players have noted that her positioning, always facing a specific direction, always giving readings that seem to anticipate the player's questline progression, suggests she may not be as external to the Hold's workings as she appears. She's a reader of bones who sits very close to a gathering place of the dead and dying. She may simply have more to read there than elsewhere. Easter egg 125. The Amber Egg and the Mystery of Rebirth. The amber egg that Renala cradles and protects after her defeat is described as an artifact associated with rebirth, specifically with the power to reincarnate beings with new forms and new potential. The game uses it as a mechanic. Renala allows the player to reallocate their stats, but in the story, the amber egg is a gift from Radagon, the husband who left her. The fact that the artifact associated with starting over, with becoming something new, was given to Renala by the person who left her is either a cruel joke or a very precise observation about who needs rebirth most. Renala sits in her library, surrounded by the echoes of her children, cradling an object that promises everything that was taken from her can be returned in new form. She will not use it on herself. Easter egg 126. The hidden path to the Halig Tree and the secrecy of sacred access. The path to reach the Miquella's Halig Tree area requires the player to find both halves of the Haligtree medallion, which are held by two separate characters in two separate areas of the map, and to combine them before using them to teleport to a secret location. The secret nature of this access, the requirement to locate two halves of a divided key and reunite them, is a classic mystery tradition structure. The divided key has roots in ancient mystery religion. The Greek tessera hospitalis was a broken token used to identify friends of a household, and mystery cult initiations often involved the progressive revelation of symbols that only made sense when combined with previously received knowledge. The Haligtree's secret is guarded not by a wall, but by incomplete information, which the game distributes between two people who never speak to each other. Easter egg 127. The Valiant Gargoyle boss pair and the theme of relentless duty. The Valiant Gargoyle bosses in Siofra Aqueduct are a two-phase encounter where a second gargoyle joins the fight after the first is weakened. Their lore connects them to the Watchers of the Eternal Cities, constructed guardians given the specific purpose of protecting certain sacred structures. What makes this encounter interesting, beyond its mechanical design, is the implication that these gargoyles have been standing watch at this aqueduct for an extraordinarily long time, that they were created for a purpose and have continued to execute that purpose, regardless of everything that has changed around them. They are not aggressive because they are malicious. They are aggressive because their instruction was to guard this passage, and they have never been told to stop. Their dual nature, two guardians sharing the same watch, suggests that whatever was protected here was considered important enough to warrant redundancy. Easter egg 128. The Loretta boss variants and the loyalty of a knight captain. Royal Knight Loretta appears twice in the game, as a boss at Carrier Manor and as a harder boss variant at the Haligtree. The lore connecting these two encounters tells the story of a knight who was originally the guard of the Carian royal family, and who at some point transferred her service to Miquella and the Haligtree. She protected Carrier Manor in service to the Carian lineage, and then, when the Haligtree was created, she accompanied the most sacred element of that lineage, Miquella himself, to his new home, and stood guard there. Her second encounter is harder because she has been protecting something more sacred for longer. Her dedication is not blind obedience. It is the considered loyalty of a person who has decided what is worth protecting and committed to that decision completely. Easter egg 129. The frenzied flame prescription and the room that demands surrender. The room immediately before the three fingers requires the player to remove all equipment and stand before the three fingers naked and unprotected. This requirement, unique in the game, is a precise piece of a design philosophy. The three fingers gift, the flame of frenzy, is described as something that cannot be given to someone who clings to their identity and their possessions. You have to be willing to be nothing before you can receive everything. This mirrors multiple religious initiation traditions. The Christian tradition of baptism as dying to the old self, the Sufi tradition of fana, the annihilation of the ego before union with the divine. The three fingers don't want a soldier or a warrior. They want someone who has already let go of what they were. Easter egg 130. The remembrance system and the concept of divine memory as currency. The remembrances dropped by major bosses are described as crystallizations of memory, the concentrated essence of a being's history and power. They can be consumed to gain runes or exchanged for unique weapons and spells. The concept of memory as a tradable commodity, something that can be extracted from a person at death and repurposed, has an uncomfortable parallel in multiple traditions of ancestor veneration, where the accumulated knowledge and power of the dead is understood as an inheritance that the living can access. But in those traditions, the dead give willingly. In Elden Ring, the player takes. The remembrance system is the game's way of acknowledging that your progression is built on the consumed memories of everything you've killed, and that the acquisition of power is always, somewhere, a form of taking. Easter egg 131. The Lake of Rot and the Beauty of Decay. The Lake of Rot, a large underground body of liquid scarlet rot, is one of the game's most visually striking environments. A glowing red-pink expanse beneath a cathedral-scale ceiling, dotted with islands and ruins. The beauty of the space is deliberate. The scarlet rot is framed throughout the game as something horrible, a divine plague. But its visual design in the Lake of Rot is genuinely gorgeous, with the bioluminescent quality of the liquid and the architecture of the ruins creating a space that feels sacred rather than toxic. This is the game making a point about rot and corruption as natural processes. Decay is not ugly. It is part of a cycle that includes beauty. The Lake of Rot is what happens when a force of transformation is left to accumulate without opposition. It creates something terrible and stunning in equal measure. Easter egg 132. Gurank's diet and the nature of a beast that eats death. Gurank, the beast clergyman, is found in the bestial sanctum in Caelid and accepts death roots in exchange for beast incantations. He is clearly struggling to contain himself, with his behaviour becoming increasingly erratic as you feed him more death roots. The detail that makes Gurank interesting beyond the surface level is the nature of what he's eating. Death root is the substance of destined death, which was sealed away from the world by Maraketh and Marika. Gurank is consuming the sealed banned substance of true death, using it as food. His incantations are powered by ingesting what the world's current order has defined as forbidden. He is an entity that sustains itself on what the dominant power structure considers its most dangerous secret, which makes him either a walking critique of that power structure's choices or simply a very unusual being with unusual dietary requirements. Easter egg 133. The Nomadic Merchant's Song and the Fragments of Cultural Memory. Returning to the nomadic merchants and their song, several of the merchants, if you speak with them extensively, and in the right order, will speak fragments of this song. The song is described in some item descriptions as a traditional lullaby or travelling song of the merchant community. The fact that it is fragmented across the world, held in pieces by isolated individuals, is a comment on how oral culture survives displacement and persecution. When a community is scattered, its shared songs are distributed between the survivors, each carrying a piece. The whole only exists when the community is whole. The merchants can't sing the whole song anymore, not because they've forgotten it, but because the other voices needed to complete it are too far away or too dead to be reached. Easter egg 134. The sealed caves and the things the world didn't want found. Several sealed caves in the game require specific keys or items to access, and the things found inside them consistently fall into one of two categories: things that are dangerous to the existing order, or things that were someone's private secret. The sealed cave in Caelid contains evidence of a sorcery practice the Academy would have condemned. The sealed cave in Lanedell leads toward the sewers and their terrible contents. The sealing of these spaces was always done by someone with the power and the motive to contain what was inside. Finding a sealed space and breaking that seal is, in the game's implicit logic, always an act of trespass, always a violation of some ancient decision about what should be hidden. The game never tells you whether those decisions were right. It just puts you at the door with the key. Easter egg 135. The Crucible Feather, Talisman, and the Wings of an Earlier Age. The Crucible Feather Talisman boosts the damage of rolling sparks, a skill associated with the Crucible. Its description references feathers, which appears in the context of Crucible aspects as a trait of that primordial era's life forms. Birds and winged creatures appear throughout the lands between in unusual abundance, and the Crucible's catalogue of ancient life forms includes feathered aspects alongside tails, brachial appendages, and horns. The game's implicit taxonomy suggests that the Crucible-era lifeforms had a much wider range of traits than the current era's more specialized organisms. That what we understand as distinct species, birds, reptiles, mammals, were once unified expressions of a life force that carried all of these traits in a less differentiated state. The feather on this talisman is a trace of that undifferentiated beginning. Easter egg 136. The Godskin Apostles and the Theology of Peeling Divinity. The Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles are enemies found throughout the game and in a combined boss encounter at Volcano Manor. Their lore describes them as members of a tradition associated with the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who hunted gods and peeled their skin to create the black flame robes they wear. This practice of wearing the skin of a defeated divine being has precedents in several world mythologies, most notably the Aztec deity Totec, whose priests wore the flayed skins of sacrificial victims as a representation of agricultural renewal. The godskin tradition is darker in tone, but structurally similar. By wearing the skin of gods, the apostles absorb something of divine power, becoming walking trophies of divine defeats, carrying the evidence of their kills as clothing. Easter egg 137. The weather system and its subtle lore implications. Elden Ring has a weather system that causes rain, fog, and other atmospheric conditions across different parts of the map. This is typically dismissed as a purely aesthetic choice, but several players have noted that certain enemy behaviors and certain ambient sounds change with the weather in ways that suggest the weather is not random. Some of the rarer weather conditions seem to occur more frequently near specific lore-significant locations, and some NPC dialogue responds to weather in ways that suggest the characters perceive it as meaningful. Whether this is deliberate or simply the consequence of a detailed simulation is unclear, but the possibility that the weather in the lands between is not atmospheric dressing, but a form of environmental communication from the world itself is consistent with a game in which the entire landscape is saturated with meaning. Easter egg 138. The colossal weapons tradition and its roots in Berserk. The category of colossal weapons in Elden Ring, which includes swords, clubs, and greatswords that are larger than the player character, is clearly influenced by the Dragon Slayer from Berserk, but the tradition goes further than that single reference. In Berserk, the concept of a weapon, too large for a normal person to use effectively, wielded by someone who has surpassed normal human limits, is a visual and narrative statement about the nature of extraordinary ability and the cost it extracts from those who wield it. Colossal weapons in Elden Ring carry this same visual argument. They are too big. They should not work. The tarnished who wields them has gone beyond what the normal body is built for. The game never explains mechanically why your character can use these things. It just lets you. The implication is that you have become something other than ordinary. Easter egg 139. The Volcano Manor's architecture and the inversion of sacred space. The Volcano Manor is built inside an active volcano, which is the opposite of the game's typical sacred architecture, which tends to be elevated, golden, and open to the sky. The manor is below ground level, surrounded by fire of a different kind than the Erdtree's gold, associated with a lord who consumed a serpent of blasphemy, and is pursuing a divine feast rather than a divine order. The architectural inversion is a precise statement. What the Erdtree built upward and toward the light, Rykard built downward and toward heat. What the Erdtree made golden, the manor makes red and black. The sacred space of Volcano Manor is a theological negative of the Erdtree's aesthetic, not because it lacks devotion, but because it is devoted to something the Erdtree would describe as its opposite. Easter egg 140. The Erdtree spirit in the Fringe Folk Hero's grave. The Fringe Folk Hero's grave is an area accessible from the very beginning of the game, reachable via 2 Stonesword keys right at the start. Inside is a difficult gauntlet involving chariot traps, and at the end is an ulcerated tree spirit. The placement of this boss at the very start of the game, hidden behind two keys that most players need to deliberately acquire, functions as both a challenge for the very prepared and a lore statement. Even at the beginning of the world, even in a grave this close to the starting point, the corruption of the eared tree's root system is already present. The rot and the corruption aren't just late-game revelations. They are present from the first moment, waiting, underground, behind a door that takes a little effort to open. Easter egg 141, the Great Jar and its 3 trials. The Great Jar is a large ceramic jar, NPC found in Caelid, who invites the player to face 3 invaders in succession. Completing this challenge earns the Arsenal Charm Talisman, which increases your maximum equipment load. The Great Jar never speaks in conventional dialogue, communicating only through gesture. It is, essentially, a test without an examiner, a challenge offered silently by a jar. The 3 invaders, who appear as red phantoms, are themselves jar-themed, named after the jar aesthetic. The Great Jar has assembled a community of followers, jar warriors, who serve as its champions, and it administers a trial through them. The social structure of this arrangement, a silent authority figure, devoted followers who do its bidding, and a test offered to worthy strangers, mirrors the structure of a mystery cult with unusual precision. Easter egg 142. The way lightning changes the Stormvale Castle weather. Stormvale Castle, home of Godric the Grafted, is named for the constant storms that surround it. During the approach and the exploration of the castle, lightning strikes in the distance, and the wind is persistent and aggressive. The detail that many players miss is that the lightning and the storm are not purely atmospheric. The Godric-aligned soldiers on the battlements are, in several positions, running lightning rod-style equipment, and some item descriptions associated with the castle's defences reference the storm as a deliberate military asset rather than simply a natural condition. Stormvale harnesses its weather. The storms are both natural and engineered, which points toward a military tradition that incorporated environmental forces as part of defensive design, a concept found in multiple historical fortifications, but rarely in gaming environments. Easter egg 143. The Rune of Death and what Marika knew. The Rune of Death was removed from the Elden Ring by Marika, or by those acting in her interest, and given to Malekith to seal away. This act of removal is the reason that true death, destined death, is no longer freely available to the world. People who should die don't die completely. They linger. They reform. They become tarnished who come back. The question that this raises, and that the game's lore only approaches from the side, is what Marika knew when she made this decision. Did she remove destined death because she feared it? Because she wanted to protect her children from it? Because the greater will ordered her to? Or because she wanted an insurance policy, a world where death wasn't final, where mistakes could be revisited? The answer the game points toward most strongly is the last one. The person who eventually shattered the Elden Ring had reasons. The removal of death may have been the first step in that very long plan. Easter egg 144. The nomadic merchant's pot helmet and the jar culture it references. Some nomadic merchants wear pot helmets, a large ceramic vessel worn on the head in the style of Alexander and the jar people. This detail, easy to miss, suggests a cultural overlap between the nomadic merchant community and the jar culture, or possibly that the pot helmet is simply a practical piece of headgear available to anyone who needs a durable, cheap covering. But the detail is interesting because it complicates the narrative of the jar people as a distinct culture. If pot wearing is a practice shared across multiple communities, then Alexander and his kind are not unique in their relationship to ceramic vessels. The jar is not just their identity, it is a material tradition that the lands between shares more broadly, a culture of using available materials in creative ways, regardless of origin. Easter egg 145. Seluvis's questline and the ethics of puppetry. Preceptor Seluvis has one of the darkest questlines in the game. He creates puppet dolls out of living people using a specific potion, and his workshop in Three Sisters contains evidence of this practice in the form of the puppets available for purchase. The target of his most explicit attempt is Nephili Lu, a character with her own heroic questline. What makes Seluvis more than simply a villain is the precision of his craft. He is an academy-trained sorcerer applying his knowledge to the creation of servile beings, which is exactly what the Academy does in creating Albinaurics and Silver Tears. Seluvis is simply doing the same thing on a smaller scale with people who didn't volunteer. His horror is not alien to the game's world. It is the logical extension of practices his society already endorses. Easter egg 146. The way E.G. speaks about Bled. E.G., the war councillor of the Carian royal family, has a relationship with Bled that is suggested rather than stated in most of their interactions. When you progress through Rani's questline and encounter Blad's deterioration, E.G.'s dialogue reveals a protectiveness toward him that goes beyond professional duty. He knew what Blad was made for. He knew what the two fingers built him to be, and he stayed with the Carian family anyway, which means he chose to be complicit in maintaining the conditions of Blad's existence, including its inherent tragedy. His dialogue, when Blad's situation reaches its conclusion, is the response of someone who always knew this was coming and could not bring himself to warn Bled because the warning would have served no purpose. The thing E.G. couldn't say was that some creations are doomed by their design. Easter egg 147. The Giant's Prayer Book and the Religion of a Conquered People. The Giant's Prayer Book contains incantations associated with the Giant's Flame, the ritual fire tradition of the giant civilization that was defeated by the Erdtree's forces. The fact that this prayer book exists and can be given to a cleric to learn its incantations suggests that the giant's religion survived their military defeat, preserved in text form. The incantations available from it, Giant's Flame take thee and flame, fall upon them, describe a form of divine fire that predates and is distinct from the Erdtree's own fire-based holy practices. The prayer book is a theological artifact of a defeated religion, and the game allows you to practice that defeated religion alongside or instead of the Erdtree's orthodoxy. The giants lost the war, their gods didn't necessarily lose. Easter egg 148. The kindred of rot and the biology of sacred disease. The kindred of rot are insect-like creatures found near areas associated with scarlet rot, appearing as large, vaguely humanoid insects that serve the rot as a kind of clergy. Their lore describes them as beings who have achieved a form of enlightenment through their connection to the rot, becoming divine servants of the spread. The concept of sacred disease, of illness as a form of divine appointment rather than punishment, has a long history in religious thought. The kindred of rot are its most literal expression in the game. They are not just infected, they are elevated. The rot has not destroyed their intelligence or their purpose. It has given them new ones. They exist in service of a power that the dominant civilization considers a plague and they experience as a calling. Easter egg 149. The Alecto boss and the Three Furies. Alecto, Black Knife ringleader, is a boss found in an Evergale and connected to the Black Knife assassin tradition. Her name, Alecto, is one of the three Erinyes or Furies from Greek mythology, divine avengers who pursued those guilty of crimes against divine order. The Erinyes, of whom Alecto was specifically associated with endless anger and whose name means unceasing in anger, pursued violators of the divine covenant, those who had broken sacred oaths or committed crimes that human law couldn't address. Alecto leads the assassins who killed Godwyn, which was itself a violation of divine order. Whether her name marks her as one who serves divine vengeance or one who acts against it is deliberately ambiguous. The Erinyes punished those who broke divine law. Alecto's order broke it first. Easter egg 150, the halfway point. 150, halfway to 270, and a quarter of the way through everything we have tonight. If you have been drifting, let your eyes close. The world of the lands between has a great deal more to show you before the light comes back. Easter egg 151. The spectral lance sorcery and the Roman military connection. Spectral lance is a sorcery that summons a magical spear to hurl at enemies, and its description connects it to an ancient tradition of using sorcery to replicate the effects of conventional weapons. The phrasing of the description, the care with which it specifies the angle of the throw and the weight of the projection, reads less like a mystical description and more like a weapons manual. The Roman pilum, the distinctive heavy javelin of the Roman legionnaire, was a weapon designed specifically to bend or break on impact, preventing the enemy from throwing it back. Spectral lance cannot be retrieved by enemies for exactly the same reason. It's designed as a one-way weapon, a purely offensive tool with no defensive application. The Academy's sorcerers were historians of warfare as well as practitioners of magic. Easter egg 152. The Radagon icon talisman and the concept of divine efficiency. The Radagon icon is a talisman that reduces the casting time of sorceries and incantations. Its description connects it to Radagon's own casting ability, describing him as having achieved a speed and precision in spellcasting that most practitioners consider beyond the reach of conventional training. The concept of divine efficiency, of being so perfectly aligned with the nature of what you're doing that the time required to do it shrinks, has roots in multiple athletic and martial traditions. Mastery is described in many craft traditions as reaching a point where effort becomes invisible, where the practitioner's intention and the action are simultaneous rather than sequential. The Radagon icon offers a taste of that mastery through external means, which is the game's way of noting that shortcuts exist, but the real thing is achieved through something the talisman doesn't provide. Easter egg 153. The sorcery traditions compared. Elden Ring contains three broad sorcery traditions: the Academy's glintstone sorcery, the primeval currents of Azur and Lusar's heretical tradition, and the Carian moonlit sorcery. Each represents a different philosophical relationship with cosmic power. The Academy's tradition is institutional, organized, and careful. Azur and Lusat's tradition is unmediated and consuming, reaching for the source of all magic at the cost of the self. The Carian tradition is lunar, cyclical, associated with a reflection and light that is borrowed rather than primary. Together, they represent three ways of relating to a power larger than yourself: through organized study, through direct unmediated contact, and through attunement to a softer reflection of that power. All three are valid. All three cost something. The game gives you access to all three and lets you build the combination you can live with. Easter egg 154. Dialos and the questline of a man who couldn't protect what mattered. Dialos Hoslo is a recurring NPC whose questline tracks the story of a man who pursued his missing retainer Lanya across the lands between, only to find her dead in Volcano Manor. The questline proceeds through his grief, his rage, his eventual resolution to die in service of something meaningful in Jarburg. The detail that makes Dialos' story resonate is how ordinary his tragedy is in the context of the game. He's not a demigod. He's not a warrior of legendary power. He's a person who loved someone, lost them, and spent the rest of his life figuring out what to do with that loss. In a game full of cosmic stakes and divine conflicts, Dialos' story is told at human scale, which makes it, paradoxically, one of the most affecting in the game. Easter egg 155. The teardrop scarab and its role as divine prey. The teardrop scarabs are small glowing creatures that run away from the player when approached and drop valuable items when killed. Their lore, distributed across several descriptions, suggests they are creatures associated with grace, beings that collect and carry fragments of the Erd tree's favour. The scarab as a sacred creature has obvious precedent in ancient Egyptian religion. The scarab beetle was associated with the sun god Ra and with divine protection, with the rolling of the sun across the sky. The teardrop scarabs carry grace across the landscape, in the same way the Egyptian scarab was understood to carry divine force across the sky. The player kills them to collect what they carry. The parallel with the Egyptian tradition of making amulets from scarab-shaped stones, collecting the form of the divine carrier to retain its power, is uncomfortable but precise. Easter egg 156. The incantation scarab and the church traditions. Following from the teardrop scarabs, the incantation scarabs carry the sacred texts of various church traditions, dropping spells and prayers when killed. The specific incantations available from different types suggest that different church traditions deployed different scarabs, as if the sacred texts of each faith had a corresponding carrier creature. The concept of sacred texts being transported by specific animals has precedent in multiple mythological traditions, where divine knowledge is specifically carried by particular species. Birds carry messages for gods, scarabs carry the sun. The incantation scarabs carry the prayers of civilizations that may no longer have practitioners, running across the land with the last preserved expressions of their devotion, offering them to anyone who catches up and takes them. Easter egg 157. The sorcerer Thops and the tragedy of institutional access. Sorcerer Thops is a man who wants desperately to return to the Academy of Raya Lucaria, but cannot afford the entrance fee and cannot find a way back through its enchanted barriers. His questline involves finding an Academy glintstone key and giving it to him, after which he returns to the Academy and can subsequently be found dead at a study desk, surrounded by notes. He died studying, he got what he wanted, he died in the place he always wanted to be. His ghost can be spoken to afterward. The detail that makes Thops heartbreaking, rather than simply sad, is the specificity of what he was pursuing. Not glory or power, but access to a library, to the continuation of his studies. The institutional barriers that kept him out were not designed to target him specifically. They target everyone without the right credentials. He just happened to be someone for whom that barrier was lethal. Easter egg 158. The crucible axe and the visual of primordial combat. The crucible axe helm is a helmet that grows horns in the style of the crucible aspect of the crucible horns incantation. Its description connects it to warriors of the early Erd tree period, who chose to emphasize and develop their crucible aspects rather than suppress them, who wore their primordial traits as armor rather than hiding them beneath the clean human forms the Golden Order preferred. The horn-helmed warrior, as a visual archetype, has deep roots in real-world military history and mythology, from the horned helmets of various ancient cultures to the Norse berserkers to the horned war gods of multiple traditions. The crucible axe helm places its wearers in this tradition deliberately. These are not people who became horned by accident. They chose the horn. They turned their primordial nature into their identity. Easter egg 159. The Church of Marika ruins and what prayers look like when belief is gone. The various Church of Marika ruins found throughout the lands between are structural evidence of a widespread devotional tradition, but most of them are abandoned, their altars intact, their candles unlit. A few have enemies or hostile creatures inside them. The detail that the churches are intact but empty is specific. They weren't torn down or defaced in most cases. They were simply abandoned. The people who prayed in them stopped coming, not because Marika's existence was denied, but because the context that made the prayers meaningful collapsed. What the empty churches represent is the archaeology of faith, the structure's belief leaves behind when the people who held it move on. The lands between is full of perfectly functional sacred architecture that no one uses anymore, which is its own form of statement about what the shattering did to ordinary devotion. Easter egg 160. The Elden Star's miracle and the cosmogony it implies. Elden Stars is an incantation that summons a stream of golden stars that function as divine projectiles. Its description is one of the most cosmologically significant in the game, noting that it is the most ancient of the Erd Tree's incantations, predating the Erd Tree itself, and that it may encode the very beginning of the Elden Ring's existence. The concept of a prayer that predates the divine object being prayed to is theologically unusual and points towards something specific about the Elden Ring's origin. It did not arrive fully formed. It came from somewhere. The stars that fell to become the Elden Star's incantation were in the beginning the first communication of the greater will with the lands between. The initial contact of an outer god with a world it had chosen for purposes that the world itself was not consulted about. The very first thing the greater will did was shower the world with stars, and those stars became the foundation of the Golden Order. Easter egg 161. The twin bird kite shield and the duality of life and death. The twin bird kite shield depicts two birds facing in opposite directions, and its description connects it to the twin bird, a creature in the game's mythology associated with life and death as paired and inseparable processes. One bird is described as the bird of life, and the other as the bird of death, and they are bound together because neither can exist without the other. The philosophical concept of life and death as paired necessities rather than opposites is found in many traditions. The Chinese yin and yang, the Hindu concept of Shiva as both destroyer and renewer, the Norse concept of Hel as the goddess who rules what Odin and the Aesir sustain. The twin bird's design, two birds that can only face away from each other but are permanently joined, is the game's most elegant visual expression of this concept. Easter egg 162. The land squirts and the horror of half-formed life. The land squirts are a species of enemy found in specific areas of the game, and their design is genuinely unsettling. Roughly cylindrical creatures that appear to be an in-between form, something between plant, animal, and organ. Their lore, where it appears, places them in the crucible tradition of primordial, undifferentiated life. They are what happens when life doesn't fully commit to being any particular thing, when the formative process of becoming a species gets interrupted or inverted. The horror of the land squirts is the horror of potential that never resolved. Creatures that are close to being something meaningful, but aren't quite anything yet. In the lands between's biological mythology, they are less a species than a condition, the condition of life, when the formative principle that normally defines species hasn't done its work. Easter egg 163. The Sage's Cave and the dual presence of two questlines. The Sage's Cave contains elements of two separate questlines, the Black Knife Assassin tradition and a more intimate narrative about a specific individual. What's notable is the physical evidence of cohabitation. Two different sets of story elements occupying the same physical space, suggesting that two different people use this cave at different times, or possibly simultaneously, without necessarily being aware of each other. The game uses caves like this throughout to compress narrative density into small spaces. A cave that has been used by multiple characters across different periods of time accumulates layers of story that you have to read stratigraphically, like an archaeologist examining soil layers. The most recent story sits on top. The older ones are visible beneath it if you look carefully at what remains. Easter egg 164. The Carolus Glintstone Crown and the concept of academic martyrdom. The Carolus Glintstone Crown is headwear associated with a specific lineage of Academy sorcerers, and its description mentions that the individual it belonged to pursued a particular sorcery research path to its lethal conclusion. The tradition of academic pursuit that destroys the practitioner is embedded throughout the Academy's lore. Azur and Lusa were broken by the primeval current. Renala's obsession with rebirth left her shattered after her husband's abandonment. Thops died studying. The Academy is portrayed as an institution that contains and sometimes produces people for whom the pursuit of knowledge is absolute, for whom the cost of knowing is not a deterrent but simply a condition. The Carolus crown commemorates one such person in the way that medals commemorate fallen soldiers, as a reminder that the institution extracts this and considers it worthwhile. Easter egg 165. The Night's Sacred Ground and its fading ceremony. Night's Sacred Ground is an incantation that creates a sacred zone at night that boosts the damage of faith-based attacks. Its description connects it to the Gloam-Eyed Queen's tradition and to the way that sacred power was organized in the period before the Erdtree's order consolidated. The interesting detail is the emphasis on night. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's power was specifically associated with the dark, with the gloaming, the period between day and night. The Golden Order's dominance effectively ended the tradition of night sacred practices. The game's day and night cycle, which creates observable differences in enemy behavior and in the appearance of certain NPCs, may be a mechanical echo of the theological divide between day-associated and night-associated divine power that structures so much of the game's pre-shattering history. Easter egg 166. The Perfumers and their craft as metaphor. The Perfumers are a specific class of enemy associated with the Altus Plateau and the upper levels of the lands between civilization. They carry perfume atomizers and use chemical attacks. Their lore places them in the tradition of a wealthy, sophisticated upper-class culture that deployed alchemical knowledge as both a social and a martial tool. The concept of perfumery as both art and science has a long history in real-world culture. The medieval tradition of apothecaries and perfumers was closely related to early chemistry and alchemy, with perfumers being among the first practitioners to work with distillation and extraction techniques. The Elden Ring perfumers are the game's version of this tradition, a class of practitioners who turn sophisticated chemical knowledge into tools of status and violence simultaneously. Easter egg 167. The Fire Monks and the preservation of prohibited flame. The Fire Monks are enemies associated with the Giants' Flame tradition and with the mountaintop areas. They maintain the Flame of Ruin, the sacred fire of the Giants, which the Erdtree's order tried to extinguish after the Giants' defeat. The Fire Monks are either warriors who refuse to accept that defeat, or a tradition maintained to preserve the flame for a future that hasn't come yet. The concept of preserving a sacred fire against the wishes of the dominant order has precedent in the Vestal Virgins of Rome, who maintained the sacred fire of Vesta as a civic and religious duty, and in the Zoroastrian tradition of maintaining sacred fires that are never allowed to go out. The Fire Monks are the game's version of this tradition, people who have made the maintenance of a flame their entire life and their entire resistance. Easter egg 168. The Clean Rot Armor's silent detail. When you examine the Clean Rot armor set at maximum zoom in the inventory, the breastplate contains a subtle detail that most players never see. There are tiny marks along the inside surface of the armor that appear to be measurements, hash marks of a kind that suggests someone was tracking something. The size and nature of the marks suggest they might be recording the spread of scarlet rot on the body of the person who wore the armor, tracking the progression of the disease from the inside. A clean rot knight who chose to expose themselves to the rot in devotion to millennia would presumably want to track how far it had progressed. The armour becomes, on close inspection, a medical document, a record of devotion measured in the advancement of disease across a human body. Easter egg 169. The Dragon Cult Prayer Book and the Thunder God Tradition. The Dragon Cult Prayer Book contains lightning-based incantations associated with the dragon's control of storm and electricity. The Dragon Cult, which predates the Erdtree's order, venerated the power of the ancient dragons, and the Erdtree's Golden Order co-opted this tradition by incorporating lightning as one of its own holy attributes. The appropriation of the Thunder God tradition by newer religious authorities is historically documented. The Norse god Thor's thunder cult was absorbed into Christianity in Scandinavia, with Thor's hammer being compared to and eventually subordinated to the cross. The dragon cult's lightning was absorbed into the Erdtree's holy practice in exactly the same way, a theological incorporation that honoured the older tradition by reframing its power as a subset of the new order's authority. Easter egg 170. The Wandering Nobles near Stormhill, and what their survival means. The Wandering Nobles found wandering the Stormhill region and near the road to Stormvale Castle are, as established earlier, former members of Godric's court who have survived the general collapse of his administration. But the specific nobles found near the road to the castle are notable for what they carry: torches, in some cases, and simple weapons that are clearly not military equipment. These are not soldiers, they are courtiers who grabbed whatever was available. The detail that they are found near the road, not inside the safety of the castle, suggests they were expelled rather than simply having wandered out. Godric's court was already fracturing before the player arrives. The nobles outside the castle are the people who didn't make the cut for whatever final desperate consolidation Godric was attempting. Easter egg 171. The way Godric's phase transition works, and what it says about desperation. Godric the Grafted's boss fight has a famous phase transition where he grafts the head and neck of a defeated dragon onto his arm, using it as a flamethrower. This transition happens when his HP drops below a certain threshold, meaning it occurs when he is losing. He doesn't open with the dragon arm. He uses it as a last resort. The detail that makes this more than just a dramatic boss design is what it says about Godric's understanding of his own power. He has grafted hundreds of things onto his body. He has the most elaborate collection of grafted limbs of anyone in the game. And when he's actually in danger, the tool he reaches for is one he reserves for emergencies. The dragon head is his ace, his insurance, the thing he keeps in reserve for the moment when everything else is failing. Even the most extravagant collector keeps something back for when it really counts. Easter egg 172. The Celia Crystal Tunnel and the Imprisoned Workers. Celia Crystal Tunnel in Caelid contains workers, human enemies who appear to be working the mine under duress. Their presence in a region as hostile and corrupted as Caelid suggests they were either sent there as a form of punishment, since working in a scarlet rot-adjacent mine in Caelid is effectively a death sentence, or they were there when the rot arrived and couldn't leave. The Celia Crystal Tunnel is visually remarkable for how well preserved its mining infrastructure is despite the rot that surrounds the region, which suggests someone has been maintaining it. Someone wanted the crystalline materials from this tunnel badly enough to keep workers in one of the most hostile environments in the game. The economics of extraction in a post-shattering world apparently still function. They just function at a terrible human cost. Easter egg 173. The Stone Digger Troll Boss and the theme of forced labour's resistance. The Stone Digger Troll Boss variant, found in Celia Crystal Tunnel, is significantly more aggressive than the normal Stone Digger trolls encountered elsewhere. Its location in the middle of a mine where trolls are clearly used as labour suggests that this particular troll has refused or broken free from its assigned role. The boss fight with a troll that is actively fighting back rather than simply existing as a labour creature is, in the context of the mine's implied conditions, a slave rebellion in miniature. The game doesn't frame it this way explicitly. You are encouraged to kill it for the reward. But the context makes the encounter uncomfortable in a way that seems deliberate. This is a creature whose only crime in context is refusing to work. Easter egg 174. The glintstone pebble and the lowest rung of cosmic knowledge. Glintstone pebble is the most basic sorcery in the game, a simple projectile that fires a small orb of glintstone energy. Its description notes that it is the first thing an academy student learns, the entry point to an entire tradition of cosmic knowledge. The detail that the most basic expression of star-powered magic is a pebble, a small thrown rock, is a deliberate design choice that grounds an otherwise cosmic magical tradition in the familiar. All the sorcery in the game begins here. All the elaborate primeval current magic that drove Azure and Lusat to their breaking points. All the Karian lunar magic that drives Rani's cosmic independence begins with the knowledge of how to throw a small rock at something using a stick. The beginning of wisdom is always humbler than its practitioners would prefer. Easter egg 175. The tibia marina on the mountaintops and the cold of death. The tibia marina variant found in the mountaintops of the giants appears in one of the coldest, most remote areas of the game, summoning skeleton warriors in a landscape already full of giant skeletons and ruins. The cold is detail-specific. Mountaintop tibia mariners summon specifically frost-themed skeletal warriors, connecting the already established psychopomp imagery of the mariner to the specific climate of the region. Death in the cold has a different quality than death in other environments. It is slower. It preserves. The giants who died in this region left enormous preserved remains. The tibia marina works in a place where the dead are exceptionally well preserved, as if the cold has made its work easier, or perhaps as if it was drawn to a place where so many things died and stayed. Easter egg 176. The Nox flowing hammer and the artisan tradition. The Nox. Flowing hammer is a weapon associated with the Nox people, and its design is unlike conventional hammers. It is elongated and fluid-looking, as if the metal were caught in motion. Its description connects it to a craft tradition unique to the Nox, whose underground civilization produced distinctive weapons and tools adapted to the specific conditions of underground life. The flowing aesthetic of the hammer suggests a metallurgical tradition that emphasizes flexibility and momentum over brute force, a philosophy of weapon making that prioritizes the transfer of energy over the concentration of it. The Nox, sealed underground, developed their own answers to problems that surface civilizations answered differently. Their tools reflect a people who solved the same problems from a completely different starting point. Easter egg 177. The two fingers communication and the concept of divine lag. When you receive a blessing from the two fingers through a finger maiden, the communication process involves interpretation and translation. The fingers do not speak human language. They make sounds that the maidens translate. The implication of this two-step process is that divine will is not directly intelligible to human minds, that the transmission of intent from an outer god to a human being requires intermediary beings specifically adapted to the translation. This gap between divine intention and human understanding is a concept found in most major world religions. The idea that human minds cannot directly perceive or process divine communication and require mediators, prophets, priests, angels to make it comprehensible. In Elden Ring, this isn't metaphorical. The fingers literally make sounds that humans can't understand without a specialist. The divine is structurally incomprehensible. The finger maidens are what makes it actionable. Easter egg 178. The Writhe-blood ruins and the sacrifice tradition. The Writhe-blood ruins contain elements of a blood sacrifice tradition, with altars and evidence of ritualistic killing present in the architecture and item placements. The specific design of the altars and the placement of remains suggests a tradition that predates Mog's blood cult, that blood sacrifice was a practice in the lands between, before Mog received his blessing from the formless mother. The implication is that blood as sacred substance has a longer history in this world than any single faction's use of it, that it was recognized as meaningful long before it became associated with any specific divine patron. The formless mother didn't invent blood as a medium of divine contact. She simply offered herself as the recipient of an already existing practice. Easter egg 179. The Draconic Tree Sentinel and the hybrid of two traditions. The Draconic Tree Sentinel is a variant of the Tree Sentinel found guarding the entrance to Leyndell, the royal capital, but it is equipped with lightning-based attacks associated with the dragon cult tradition. Its presence at the capital's entrance is significant. The capital of the Erdtree's Golden Order is guarded by a warrior who carries the theological tradition of the older dragon cult. The hybridization is not accidental. Leyndell's tradition was always a composite, incorporating elements of the dragon cult alongside the Erdtree's own authority, as documented in the Dragon Cult prayer book and in the presence of the Elden Ring's own lightning-associated lore. The Draconic Tree Sentinel is the guardian of a city that has always been built on more than one foundation, embodying the theological syncretism of the Erdtree's administrative genius. Easter egg 180. The way time works in Farum Azula and the Rune of Time. Crumbling Farum Azula's temporal strangeness is accompanied by a specific mechanical detail. In that area, the day/night cycle behaves differently than in the rest of the game, with the sky outside the floating ruins appearing consistently dark and stormy regardless of in-game time. The Rune of Time associated with the Malekith boss fight in that area is described as a force that can alter temporal flow. Farum Azula is a place that exists in a different relationship to time than the rest of the lands between, which is consistent with its lore as a city predating the current age. The game's mechanical representation of this, the consistent storm sky that doesn't follow the normal day/night cycle, is a quiet detail that most players register as atmosphere, but that carries specific lore weight. Time doesn't work the same way there, because it never did. Easter egg 181. The Liurnian moonlight and the sorcerer's sky. Liurnia of the Lakes, the region associated with Raya Lucaria and the Carian lineage, has a consistently bluish atmospheric quality compared to other regions of the game. The lighting in Liurnia favours blue and silver tones, particularly at night when the moon's reflection on the lakes creates an environment visually different from the warm gold of Limgrave or the red corruption of Caelid. This regional atmospheric identity is the game doing colour design as lore design. The Carian tradition is lunar, silver, cool. Its home region reflects that theology in its ambient light. Walking into Liurnia feels different because it is different, because the power that saturates this place is of a different temperature and colour than the Erdtree's gold. The sorcerer's sky is always a little bluer than the tarnished's journey requires. Easter egg 182. The regal omen bairn and what orphaned divine objects become. The regal omen. Bairn is an item that summons a flash of omen energy as a weapon. It is described as one of the children of Morgoth's court, a small omen being that had been preserved in some form after its death. The concept of orphaned divine objects, sacred items that have outlived the context that gave them meaning, is a recurring theme in the game's item design. Bairn means child in Scottish and Irish, And the regal omen bairn is a child that outlived its purpose, that can now be used as a tool by anyone who finds it. The omens were cursed in life. Their remnants become weapons in death. The cycle of a people treated as monstrous, producing artifacts that others will use as instruments of force is not a narrative the game invents. It's one it borrows from history. Easter egg 183. The scepter of the all-knowing and Gideon's final irony. The scepter of the all-knowing is the weapon dropped by Gideon Ofnir. Its description references his role as the person who gathered more information about the lands between than perhaps any other being in the present day. The irony encoded in this weapon is that Gideon, the all-knowing, used his knowledge to conclude that action was pointless, and then died attacking someone on the threshold of action. The scepter he carries is not a weapon of power in the conventional sense. It is a symbol of authority, of scholarly achievement, of the accumulation of wisdom. He brings a scholarly symbol to a fight he knows he won't win, which is the most Gideon possible ending to the Gideon story. The all-knowing person's final act is a gesture rather than a strategy. Easter egg 184. The imp statues and the playfulness of divine enforcement. The imp statues that guard stone-sword key doors are small crouching figures with wide eyes and defensive postures. They are clearly not threatening in the way that most guardian creatures in the game are. They are small. They look startled. The lore associated with them suggests they were designed as minor divine wards rather than serious combat threats, placed by the Erdtree's order to discourage casual exploration of sensitive areas rather than to stop determined intruders. The Stonesword key bypasses them entirely. They are not locks that require force to break. They are warnings that require a specific tool to acknowledge. The imp statue is the Erdtree's version of a no trespassing sign. It doesn't stop you, it just makes clear that someone put it there deliberately, and that proceeding past it is a choice with implications. Easter egg 185. The connection between Torrent and divine horses in mythology. Torrent, the player's spirit horse, is more than just a means of fast travel. Several details in item descriptions and NPC dialogue suggest that Torrent is a spirit of the wild, associated with a finger maiden before the player, that he carries some form of grace-adjacent divine power, and that his connection to the player character is personal in a way that most tools in the game are not. The divine horse has precedent in world mythology, Sleipnir in Norse mythology, Pegasus in Greek, Aryan in Greek myth, Al-Buraq in Islamic tradition. In each case, the horse is not merely a fast vehicle, but a connection between the mortal and the divine, a creature whose speed and nature transcend the normal limits of the physical world. Torrent's double jump, his ability to traverse terrain that would kill a conventional horse, and his ability to be called from death multiple times all point toward his being not quite a natural creature. Easter egg 186. The sacred tear items and what tears mean in religious tradition. Sacred tears are items found in churches throughout the lands between, and they enhance the healing capacity of the flask of crimson tears. They are described as crystallized tears from the statue of Marika, tears that the divine figure wept and that were preserved and gathered by the faithful. In multiple religious traditions, the tears of divine figures are associated with healing and sacred power. The Virgin Mary's weeping statues in Catholic tradition, the concept of divine mourning in Greek tragedy, where a god's grief literally transforms the landscape. The Japanese tradition of sacred springs associated with divine tears. The sacred tears are this tradition made functional. The divine grief of a god who saw what was happening to her world, preserved in a form that heals the living who come after. Easter egg 187. The sorcery of the Eternal City and what the Nox were trying to build. Eternal City sorceries are available in the game, and they have a different visual quality from Academy sorceries. They are silver and star-like rather than blue-white, associated with the artificial star systems the Nox built in their underground cities. The Eternal City's sorcery tradition attempted to replicate the power of the real stars using manufactured materials, essentially building a second cosmos inside the Earth. The philosophical ambition of this project is extraordinary. Not just to study the stars or channel their power, but to recreate them in a space where the real ones can't be seen. The Nox's sorceries are the products of a civilization that refused to accept that they had been removed from the sky and responded by building a new one. Easter egg 188. The Carian retaliation and the concept of reflected force. Carian retaliation is an ash of war that parries a spell and sends it back at the caster. Its description connects it to the Carian tradition of using the moon's reflective quality as a combat philosophy. The moon does not generate its own light, it reflects the sun's. The Carian school, built on lunar magic, applied this principle to combat. Rather than generating offensive force independently, Carian retaliation takes what the enemy sends and returns it. This is a martial philosophy with roots in real-world practices. Judo, Aikido, and several other martial disciplines are built on the principle of using the opponent's force rather than opposing it directly. The Carian school's combat philosophy is not just aesthetically lunar. It is structurally lunar, built on the principle of reflection and redirection rather than direct generation. Easter egg 189. The sealed rune sites and the geography of divine history. The sites of grace are not evenly distributed across the lands between. Some areas have them in abundance, some areas, particularly underground zones, and areas associated with forbidden or suppressed traditions, have very few. The distribution of grace, the physical presence of the Erd Tree's blessing in the landscape, is a map of the Erd Tree's priorities and its reach. Areas the Erd Tree considered important received more grace. Areas it considered hostile or peripheral received less. The sites of grace in the Haligtree area connect to a different network, one associated with Michaela's tree rather than Marika's. The underground has scattered, weakened grace sites. The geography of divine blessing is, in the game's design, also a political map. Easter egg 190. The rune of the unborn and what was never allowed to exist. The rune of the unborn is an item received from Renala after completing certain requirements, and it is used to allow the player to reassign their stats. Its description refers to the unborn as beings of pure potential, those who have not yet been committed to a specific form. The concept of unbornness as a state of maximum potential is philosophically interesting. The unborn have not yet been constrained by the choices and accidents of development. They are possibility without limitation. Using the rune of the unborn to reassign your stats is, in the game's logic, a brief return to that state of pure potential before recommitment. The rune doesn't change what you were. It returns you to the moment before you became anything specific, and then lets you choose again. Easter egg 191. The Crucible Knight or Dovis, and the concept of a name beyond survival. Crucible Knight or Dovis is one of the harder Crucible Knight encounters in the game, appearing as a dual boss with another Crucible Knight. His name is unusual because most enemy variants in the game are not individually named, but Ordovis is specifically identified. The detail that makes this notable is that a Crucible Knight who has survived long enough to acquire an individual name is, by the game's logic, someone who has fought and won an extraordinary number of times. The Crucible Knights serve something older than the Erd Tree. Ordovis has been serving that older order for long enough that he has a name rather than simply a title. Names are earned slowly in traditions built on survival. His name is the record of everything he has outlasted. Easter egg 192. The Bubbling Horn Hornbow and the musical weapon tradition. The hornbow is a crossbow that incorporates a horn into its design, and its description references a tradition of weapons that combined practical function with musical or ceremonial purpose. The concept of a weapon that is also a musical instrument has a long history in real-world martial culture. The war horn, the battle trumpet, the ceremonial sword with bells attached. These dual-purpose objects serve both practical and psychological functions. The sound of a weapon's distinctive music in battle was as important as its physical effect. The hornbow's design suggests a warrior culture in the lands between that considered the sound of combat as significant as its outcome, that the aesthetic experience of battle, including its music, was part of its ritual meaning. Easter egg 193. The Star Scourge greatswords and the relationship between gravity and loss. The Star Scourge greatswords are Radahnn's weapons, and their description notes that they are imbued with gravity magic capable of pulling stars from the sky. Radahn was known as the Star Scourge because he used his gravity sorcery to hold the stars in their courses, preventing celestial events from occurring. The detail that his weapons can pull stars toward the user is the inverse of his famous feat. Instead of holding stars in place, these weapons drag them closer. The philosophical relationship between gravity as protection, holding things in their proper place, and gravity as weapon, dragging things toward destruction, is embedded in the weapon's design. Radahn used the same force to protect the world as his enemies might have used to destroy it. The difference was not in the power, but in the intention. Easter egg 194. The Cleanrot spear and the precision of sacred violence. The Cleanrot spear is Malenia's Cleanrot Knight's weapon, and its description emphasizes the precision required to cause death through its infected blade. The precision detail is interesting. Scarlet rot as a weapon is normally associated with area spread and unavoidable contamination. But a spear requires precision, a single point of application, a deliberate targeting of a specific vulnerability. The Cleanrot spear is the point at which Malenia's broadly spreading divine condition has been refined into a targeted instrument of combat, a weapon that applies the transformative power of the rot to a specific enemy at a specific moment rather than spreading indiscriminately. It is, in this sense, a document of the Cleanrot Knight's philosophy, that devotion can be precise, that even sacred disease can be wielded with intention. Easter egg 195. The way Malekith moves and what it represents. Malekith's combat style is extraordinary in its agility. He moves in ways that a large armoured creature should not be capable of, bounding between walls, using the environment with a predatory fluency. His movement style is specifically that of a large, feline predator, a jaguar or leopard, rather than anything canine or equine. The beast clergyman aspect of his character suggests a being that is fundamentally animalistic beneath the sacred trappings of his role. The way he moves is the game's visual communication of what he is, a predator dressed in sacred armour, given a sacred purpose but never domesticated. His combat is the expression of a nature that the Erdtree's order tried to give divine function but couldn't fundamentally change. He is as fast and as unnerving as he is because that's what he is underneath the blessing. Easter egg 196. The Lenny's Rise Tower and its waiting occupant. Lenny's Rise is a tower in Dragonbarrow Caelid, and it contains the spirit of a sorcerer who asks the player to retrieve her memory. Her questline involves finding her remembrance and returning it to her, which she then uses to review her own life and pass on in peace. The detail that makes this encounter notable in the broader context of the game is that she has been waiting in that tower, unable to move on, because her memory was separated from her when she died. She is not trapped by malice or by power. She is trapped by an incomplete process. The retrieval of her memory is the completion of something that death started but didn't finish, which is a quiet echo of the game's larger theme about the incompleteness of endings in a world where death itself has been made ambiguous. Easter egg 197. The Golden Order incantations and the theology they encode. The Golden Order incantations, available from Goldmask and other adherents to the Golden Order, represent the most explicit philosophical content in the game's incantation system. Each one encodes a specific principle. Golden Vow encodes commitment. Law of Causality encodes consequence and completion. Discus of Light encodes the physical expression of divine law. Collected in sequence, the Golden Order incantations read like a catechism. This is what this tradition believes, expressed not as doctrine, but as action. The tradition of encoding theology in practical sacred objects, from religious icons to prayer beads to sacred formulas, is ancient and widespread. The Golden Order incantations are the game's version of this tradition. Not texts you read, but powers you perform, whose execution is itself a theological statement. Easter egg 198. The inverted statues of Caria Manor and the lunar inversion. Throughout Caria Manor, several statues appear inverted, hung from the ceiling or placed upside down relative to their orientation elsewhere in the world. The Carian tradition's relationship with the moon, with reflection, with the concept that true reality might be the inverse of what appears on the surface, is expressed in this architectural detail. The inverted statue is a visual statement about perspective. What appears upside down from one angle appears upright from another. The Carian school's lunar philosophy is built on exactly this concept of perspective relativity, of the idea that what you see depends entirely on where you're standing, which is both a sorcery philosophy and an architectural one. Easter egg 199. The Spirit Calling Bell's origin and Torrent's connection. The Spirit Calling Bell, the item used to summon spirit ashes, was given to the player by Melina or by Renna the Witch, depending on certain conditions. The connection between the bell and Torrent, who is also associated with a finger maiden before the player, suggests that the tools of grace-assisted survival are linked. Torrent and the Spirit Calling Bell come from the same tradition, both being gifts associated with female intermediaries who have a personal stake in the player's success. The bell summons the dead, the horse carries the living. Together, they represent the full range of the Tarnished's available companions, the living horse that was someone else's before you, and the dead warriors who fight for you in their echo form. The player is never truly alone in the lands between. They are surrounded by echoes. Easter egg 200. The 200th Easter egg and the middle of the night. 200 complete. The lands between is enormous, and we have covered only a fraction of what it contains. If you are still awake, welcome. If you're beginning to drift, let yourself go. The stories don't stop here. They simply continue in the dark, as they always have. Easter egg 201. The Flame of the Fell God and what Old Yellow hides. The Flame of the Fell God is an incantation dropped by Adon, Thief of Fire, and it summons a fireball associated with a deity called the Fell God, described as a being from outside the lands, between whose power is fire in its most destructive, primordial form. The Fell God is never elaborated on beyond this. It is a gesture towards something vast and external and ancient, an outer god associated with fire rather than with stars or blood or frenzy. The existence of a fire-associated outer god, separate from both the Erd Tree's sacred fire and the giant's flame of ruin, suggests that the cosmology of Elden Ring contains divine fires from multiple origins, each with its own specific nature, its own source, and its own agenda. Fire in this world is not one thing. It is a category of divine power with multiple competing claimants. Easter egg 202. The Finger Ruins and the Scale of the Outer Gods. The Finger Ruins, found in the mountaintops of the Giants, are enormous stone formations that appear to be the physical remains of actual fingers, colossal stone structures that look exactly like the two fingers, but at a scale that makes clear the being they belong to was the size of a mountain range. The discovery of these ruins is one of the game's most jaw-dropping scale moments. You have been interacting with fingers at human scale throughout the game, and then suddenly you are standing in the ruins of one that dwarfs every other structure in the game. The scale of the outer gods is not theoretical, it is architectural. The beings who sent their fingers into the lands between are visible in the ruins those fingers left, and they are immeasurably larger than anything the lands between itself has ever contained. Easter egg 203. The Siofra River and the underground world beneath the surface. The Siofra River area, one of the first underground zones players can access, is visually extraordinary. A vast underground space lit by a night sky made of artificial stars, with ruins suggesting an ancient civilization and a river running through the centre. The Siofra River connects the surface world to the underground eternal cities, functioning as the main water source for an underground ecosystem. The concept of an underground river as a boundary or pathway between worlds is found in world mythology as extensively as any single mythological concept. The Styx, the Lethe, the Vaitana of Hindu tradition, the underground rivers of Norse cosmology. The Siofra River is Elden Ring's participation in this ancient and universal tradition of the underground waterway as a threshold between the world of the living and something older and more fundamental below. Easter egg 204. The ancient dragon smithing stones and the cost of the highest power. Ancient dragon smithing stones are the rarest upgrade material in the game, required only for the very final level of weapon upgrades. Their description connects them to the ancient dragons, to materials formed in the bodies of creatures whose lives were measured in geological time. Finding and using one of these stones means encountering and taking something that was part of a being that existed before any of the game's current divine order. The cost of the very highest power is paid in material that remembers a world before power was organized. The most upgraded weapons in the game carry within them the substance of something pre-divine, something that doesn't belong to the Erd Tree's order or the dragon cult's tradition, but to an era before any of those distinctions mattered. Easter egg 205. The Beastman of Farum Azula and the World That Was. The Beastmen found in crumbling Farum Azula are humanoid creatures with animal features, dressed in fragments of ancient ceremonial clothing and fighting with techniques that suggest a developed martial tradition. Their lore places them in the pre-Erd Tree era as inhabitants of Farum Azula's original civilization, a world where the boundaries between human and animal were less defined. The Beastmen fight with the desperation of creatures who have been in the same collapsing location for an extraordinarily long time, defending a city that is literally falling apart around them. They are not evil in any meaningful sense. They are the last survivors of a world that ended and couldn't find an exit. Their aggression is the aggression of the trapped, of beings who have been in the wrong era for centuries and have run out of ways to adapt. Easter egg 206. The Ringleader's Evergale and the Prison of the Coordinator. The Ringleader's Evergale, containing Electo, carries specific details about the Evergale system itself. The fact that this prison was constructed specifically for the person who organised the Night of the Black Knives, the most significant act of divine murder in the game's history, suggests that the Erd Tree's order identified and imprisoned the coordinator of that act at some point. But Electo is in the Evergale rather than simply dead, which suggests that the Golden Order couldn't execute her, or chose not to. The Evergale system was built for precisely this situation. A person too significant to ignore and too dangerous to face directly without specific preparation. Electo is in a magical prison because whatever she knows, whatever she is, dying would be simpler than keeping her alive. Easter egg 207, the spectral steed whistle and the inheritance it represents. The spectral steed whistle, used to summon Torrent, is described as an item passed down through a finger maiden's legacy to the tarnished she chose. The word inheritance in its description is specific. The whistle was not found or made. It was given, and it was given by someone who no longer needed it. The finger maiden who gave you Torrent has, in giving you this whistle, given you the thing that carried her through whatever she faced before your journey began. The whistle is not just a summoning tool. It is the material record of a previous relationship, a bond between a horse and a woman that the woman has now transferred to you, trusting that you will be what she was or better. That weight is in the object, even though the game never speaks it aloud. Easter egg 208, the Millicent questline and the concept of individuation from a collective. Millicent begins as one of several bodies produced by Melinia's bloom, essentially a duplicate created by the Scarlet Rot's transformation. What makes her questline remarkable is the question at its centre. Can something that began as a copy become an individual? Millicent develops her own history, her own relationships, her own struggle. She becomes differentiated from the other millennia-adjacent beings by the accumulation of her own experience. Her questline is a philosophical investigation of personal identity run as an adventure story, asking whether origin determines nature, or whether nature can be built through experience, regardless of origin. The answer the game provides is inconclusive, ending in her death either way, but the question it asks is one that philosophy has been working on since Theseus was attributed a ship. Easter egg 209, the Haligtree soldier armor and the devotion of a failing mission. The Haligtree soldier armor is found on the enemy soldiers patrolling the Haligtree. Their description notes they came to the Haligtree from many different places, drawn by faith in Michaela, and that they continue to guard it despite the rot that has consumed most of it. They are soldiers defending a sanctuary that is actively killing them. Their loyalty is not to a functional institution, but to the idea of the institution, to what the Haligtree was meant to be. This is the game's clearest expression of the concept of faith as distinct from function. These soldiers don't believe in a working Haligtree. They believe in what a working Haligtree would have meant, and that belief sustains them past the point where utility would have sent them away. Easter egg 210, the Church of Inhibition and the madness it generates. The Church of Inhibition is associated with the Finger Maiden tradition and is surrounded by one of the game's most unusual environmental effects, the Frenzied Flame Eye, an invasion mechanic that generates a constant madness build-up if the player stands in view of the tower nearby while a specific event is occurring. The Church is dedicated to inhibition, to the suppression of frenzied impulse in favour of controlled divine order. Its immediate surroundings generate madness anyway, which is either an ironic comment on the failure of institutional suppression to contain what it opposes, or a sign that the thing being suppressed has grown strong enough to radiate even through the walls of a structure built to contain it. The Church of Inhibition is a building designed to suppress madness that sits at the epicenter of a madness-generating phenomenon. Easter egg 211, the Erd tree's flowering and the seasonal mythology. The Erd tree is always described as having golden leaves rather than seasonal cycles, an eternal summer of golden light that doesn't change with the seasons. The contrast with the natural world, which undergoes seasonal change, including death and rebirth, points toward the Erd tree's order as fundamentally anti-cyclical. It enforces a permanent summer of grace, a continuous state of golden flourishing that is never allowed to turn to autumn. The suppression of the natural cycle by divine authority is a concept that appears in mythological traditions that associate seasonal change with the freedom of natural forces. The Persephone myth specifically frames the return of winter as the direct consequence of a god's intervention in the natural order. The Erd tree's permanent gold is the same kind of intervention. Divine order, forcing the world to remain at the peak of the cycle and never complete the turn. Easter egg 212. The writhing runes effect and what madness means cosmologically. The festering bloody finger and other invasion items are described in terms of the runes, of the formless mother, and the three fingers' influence, connecting the act of invasion to madness and to the frenzied flames tradition. When a host is invaded in Elden Ring, from the fiction's perspective, a tarnished from a related timeline or plane of existence crosses into their world carrying hostile intent. The madness connection comes from the frenzied flames description of burning away all distinction between self and other. Invasion is the most extreme version of this, another person's violent will crossing into your specific reality uninvited. The act of invasion, read through the game's cosmological lens, is a temporary dissolution of the boundary between separate existences, which is exactly what the three fingers offer, and exactly why the Erdtree's order considers it heretical. Easter egg 213. The Shard of Alexander and what you carry after a warrior dies. The Shard of Alexander is given to the player after completing Alexander's questline with the most difficult outcome, winning the fight he requests. It is described as a fragment of his body, a piece of the jar that was Alexander, containing within it the warrior spirits he collected over his lifetime. It boosts the power of skills, translating the accumulated martial experience of Alexander's inner collection into a practical enhancement for the player. The concept of carrying a fragment of a dead friend as a source of power is found in multiple traditions: relics of saints in Catholic tradition, ancestral bones in various animist traditions, the locks of hair, or possessions of the dead kept as connection points. The Shard of Alexander is the game's version of this. You carry a piece of him, and the piece still functions. Easter egg 214. The Radan constellation and the star that fell. After Radan is defeated at the Radan festival, a meteor falls in the region of Limgrave, striking the earth near the Mistwood and opening a passage to Nokron, the Eternal City. The meteor is implied to be a star that Radan was holding in place with his gravity magic. This specific star's fall, the one that reveals Nokron, was what Rani arranged the entire festival to achieve. The detail that connects this to real astronomical mythology is the concept of falling stars as divine messengers or divine events. In multiple traditions, a falling star is an event of significance, a communication from the heavens to the earth. The star that fell to reveal Nokron is, in the game's mythology, a communication from the stars that Rani needed to receive, one that Radan had been suppressing for so long that his defeat was the only way to allow the message through. Easter egg 215. The giant jar on the road near the Jarberg approach. Approaching Jarberg, the village of Jar people and Alexander's home region, there is a large jar lying on its side in the road, empty. It's not a boss, it's not an enemy. It's just an empty jar, large enough to contain a person, lying in the road that leads to the village. The game provides no explanation for it. An empty jar on the road to the Jar people's village? The possibilities are numerous. Someone left, someone was taken, someone died and their jar is all that remains. Someone simply dropped it. The absence of context is the point. The empty jar is a mystery the game doesn't solve, which is either a deliberate narrative lacuna or simply the world generating details that will never be resolved. In either case, it feels true to a world this large. Some things don't have explanations. Sometimes there's just an empty jar in the road. Easter egg 216. The celestial dew and the concept of cleansing through sacred fluid. Celestial dew is an item used to restore a killed NPC's shop access and friendly status when they have been harmed by the player. Its description refers to the dew of the night sky, collected from places where the star's light condenses. The concept of sacred fluid that cleanses past harm and restores broken relationships is found in multiple religious traditions. Holy water in Catholic practice, the sacred Ganges water in Hindu tradition, the healing dew of Celtic mythology, associated with certain saints' wells. Celestial dew functions as a divine apology, a substance capable of undoing the consequences of a choice that can't be verbally taken back. It is, in mechanical terms, the game's most explicit acknowledgement that some wrongs can be materially remedied if you have access to the right sacred substance. Easter egg 217. The Crucible Knight boss fight structure and the concept of a perfect soldier. The Crucible Knights are arguably the most technically demanding standard enemy boss encounters in the game, with precise attack patterns that punish both aggression and passivity. Their combat style is described in lore as reflecting a tradition of martial excellence developed in an era when warriors needed to be capable of surviving against a world of undifferentiated, powerful life. The Crucible era. The precision of their combat is not the precision of trained soldiers who specialize. It is the precision of beings who developed their skills in an environment where everything was dangerous and nothing was specialized. The Crucible Knight is the game's expression of a generalist martial perfection, a being capable against any challenge because the world that made them trained them against everything. Easter egg 218. The Godfrey's Great Rune and the Honour of the First Elden Lord. Godfrey's Great Rune, carried by Hoarah-Loux/Godfrey when you fight him, has a description that notes its unusual nature. It is a rune of immense power that is not assigned to any specific divine tower for restoration. Godfrey was the first Elden Lord, the champion who cleared the lands between for Marika, the warrior who was then stripped of grace and exiled with his followers, who became the first Tarnished. The fact that his rune requires no restoration, that it is simply powerful on its own, without needing the validation of the tower system, is the game suggesting that Godfrey's power was always his own. The divine towers validate the grace of people who received it from Marika. Godfrey's power was never just received. It was always, at its foundation, his. Easter egg 219. The Elden Ring's relationship to a marriage contract. The Elden Ring is described in several item descriptions as a covenant, an agreement between the greater will and the people of the lands between, mediated through Marika. The marriage metaphor is embedded in this. Covenants in ancient legal traditions were often formalized as marriage agreements, sacred bonds between two parties that had specific terms and specific consequences for violation. Marika shattered the ring. In the covenant reading, she broke the marriage. The consequences that followed, the shattering, the chaos, the loss of divine order, are the legal consequences of a broken covenant playing out in cosmic rather than human terms. The Elden Ring is not just a magical object, it is a contractual document, and Marika found it necessary to tear it up. Easter egg 220. The way Sir Gideon reacts to you finding the Haligtree path. When you obtain the Haligtree secret medallion, Gideon Ofnir's dialogue changes in a specific way. He acknowledges that you have found information he did not give you and adjusts his advice accordingly. This is a small detail, but it reveals something about how the Round Table holds politics work. Gideon controls information. His value to the hold and to other Tarnished is his intelligence network. When you arrive with knowledge he didn't provide, you are, in the social economy of the hold, establishing yourself as an independent intelligence source, not dependent on Gideon's network. His reaction to this is not hostile, but it is careful, the reaction of a professional information broker encountering a competitor. The social subtext of the Round Table hold is more complex than it first appears. Easter egg 221. The Bell Tower of Liurnia and the Silence of the Waiting. The Bell Tower of Liurnia contains a spirit who can be invited to the Volcano Manor through a specific letter. The tower itself is isolated, standing in the middle of the lake region, with no apparent purpose other than to contain this character who waits. The concept of a waiting place, a space defined entirely by the occupation of someone who has not yet received what they're waiting for, is one of the quieter emotional notes in the game. The spirit in the tower has been waiting long enough to be there. When you arrive, long enough to have made themselves comfortable in a tower that has no other purpose. The lands between is full of people who are waiting, whose entire existence has been organized around an outcome that hasn't come. Some of them are waiting for the same thing. Some of them are waiting for very different things. All of them have been waiting for too long. Easter egg 222. The Clean Rot Knight Armor Set and the gold that remains. The Clean Rot Knight Armor Set is golden, but touched by rust and by subtle rot markings. The gold of the Erdtree's Order combining with the red of Scarlet Rot in a visual that suggests not pollution, but synthesis. The Clean Rot Knights are not soldiers who have been corrupted by the rot. They have been transformed by it into a new kind of soldier, golden and rotted simultaneously, loyal to a master who is both divine and diseased. The visual of gold touched by rust and by red suggests a tradition that has outlived the ideal conditions under which it was created and has adapted rather than collapsed. The armor doesn't look defeated, it looks adapted. It looks like what loyalty becomes when the thing you're loyal to is no longer what it was when you swore. Easter egg 223. The worm-faced victim and the spread below the surface. Near certain root-infested areas in the game, particularly in the areas where Godwyn's corrupted roots extend, there are bodies with worm-like growths emerging from them, victims of death blight whose corpses have become nodes in Godwyn's expanding underground network. These bodies are not enemies, they are environmental details. They are the evidence of how death blight spreads, not through combat, not through obvious violence, but through the soil, through the roots, through the stone. People died in ordinary ways near Godwyn's corruption, and their bodies were incorporated into it. The spread of Godwyn's death in life is not aggressive in the way that a conventional enemy is aggressive. It is simply expansive. The way roots are expansive, the way rhizomes are. Not directed, not intentional, just growing wherever the conditions allow. Easter egg 224. The Horn Talisman and the music of a dead culture. The Horn Talisman references a musical tradition of the lands between that is never fully explained. Horns appear throughout the game in various contexts, as weapons, as calling instruments, as ceremonial objects. The lore associated with horn-based objects suggests a culture that used horn music as a sacred practice, for calling across distances, for ritual, for marking the movement of armies and the passage of time. The specific horn talisman enhances incantation effects, suggesting that the horn tradition was connected to faith practice, that the music of horns had a sacred function in some religious tradition that has since been absorbed or replaced. The talisman is all that remains of this tradition in directly accessible form, a piece of an instrumental culture that has been compacted into a small wearable object. Easter egg 225. The Perfumer's Grotto and the Chemistry of Sacred Scent. The Perfumer's Grotto is a dungeon area specifically associated with the Perfumer class of enemies and with a cache of their resources and traditions. Inside, the environmental design suggests a dedicated space for the creation and testing of alchemical preparations, with containers and specialized equipment indicating a systematic practice rather than an individual craft. The grotto as a laboratory mirrors real-world histories of alchemical practice in isolated spaces. Early chemists and alchemists often worked in caves or cellars to maintain specific temperature and humidity conditions, and to ensure that the smoke and fumes of their work didn't interact with the broader environment. The Perfumer's Grotto is a production facility, not just a home, and the scale of it suggests that the perfumer tradition was an organized profession with specific infrastructure. Easter egg 226. The Gelmir hero's grave and the volcanic tradition. The Gelmir hero's grave is the catacomb associated with the Volcano Manor region and its surrounding territory, and the enemies and items within it reflect the specific martial culture of that region, a tradition that valued heat, fire, and the endurance of extreme conditions as marks of warrior excellence. The chariot traps in this grave are flame-based, the architecture references